Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Paul Singh with me. Paul is currently the co founder and chief revenue officer at Bump Health, a company with over $40 million in revenue. He is also the founder of Results Junkies, a company that invests in 200 companies each year. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I'm excited.
Of course, thankful to have you on. So, for the people that don't know you as well, kind of take us to the beginning, set the scene for, where you grew up, your family situation, what type of kid you were, things like that.
Oh man. Well, yeah, I'll probably make it sound better than it was. But my parents were immigrants from India. When we settled here in the U.S., my dad's side of the family was in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington D.C. That's where we called home. I grew up there, or here. I still live here now, actually. And the long and short of it is, we weren't poor, we weren't rich. We're a middle class family. My dad had a construction company, brick and block and masonry stuff. And that's kind of stuff that I grew up doing around the weekends with him and stuff like that. And my mom, worked at a large, bank credit union for, pretty much the whole arc of her career. And so again, we weren't poor, we weren't rich, we were just right there in the middle. My parents were hardworking immigrants, that sort of thing. Um, I was a pretty average kid, I think. Not a good student at all, to be honest with you. I think I sort of always aimed for the lowest C possible to get by, much to my parents' frustration. My sister was definitely the smarter of the two of us. And, here's the long and short of it. I went to college, George Mason University. Um, it was fun, but honestly, I would be lying if I didn't say I did it mostly for my parents. I wasn't like I never lived on campus. I never did any of that stuff. I just wanted to be done with it, to be honest with you. Um, but here's where it gets interesting to me, anyways. Again, I never had a want for money, but I also like I wanted like it's not like I wanted more, but at the same time, I'm like I couldn't connect. Like I would hear my parents say like, "Oh, education's important and you really got to do it," but I couldn't not see what was happening around me. Like, this is going to be a cliche, but I'm looking at like, my mom's friends and dad's friends who half of them weren't fully educated, but very nice people driving really fancy cars and owning liquor stores and gas stations. I'm like, what in the world? Like something doesn't add up here. Anyway, so I sold cars at CarMax back then, and through high school and college, and but anyway, where it gets interesting for me is, in hindsight, my entire mental model for how you made money was built around the idea that you either trade time for money or you trade a thing for money. So to say it a different way, hey, I'll consult with you for this many hours, or here's my hourly rate, whatever it might be, or hey, I'll do this thing for you and it'll cost you this much. I'll make you this patio. This is how much it'll cost. And because of that, when you really think about what that means, and by the way, I think that's, was the majority of the country, probably majority of the planet at the time. And this is like the late 90s, mid 90s, that sort of thing. And, what comes with that, that most people don't realize is that place really matters. Like I was living 40 miles outside the city. And I distinctly remember, this is back in the day. I don't know if the listeners remember this stuff, but this is like back in the day where you had to pay extra to have caller ID on your landline. And by the way, I don't feel old. I'm just 40, right? But it's interesting to think that like we all lived at, pre-internet and post-internet. So really
Yep.
interesting. Separate discussion for later. But I distinctly remember when people would call my dad's business line, we didn't really take calls from area codes to the west. But man, if somebody called from the east, like an area code to the east between us and DC, he would jump on it fast. And the gist of that, the reason for that is that, when you're building stuff for people, there's a physical limitation on how much you can do because you got to drive that material out there, get it done, move to the next job site. So it's really a function of how many jobs you can get done, and density matters. The point of all this is to say that not only did I grow up with this understanding or belief that time was traded for money or a thing was traded for money, but I also had this corresponding belief that place mattered. And that, just as an illustrative example for the listeners, it's like, if I wanted to be in banking, just as an illustrative example, if I wanted to be in banking, I would have to go to New York City. If I wanted to be in construction. I would go to Central Illinois to Caterpillar, that sort of thing. And anyway, one day I'm selling cars, and CarMax back then was a division of Circuit City. I'm like aging myself here a little bit. And the point is, like, here we are in the middle of Ashburn, Virginia, which was not a very big place at the time. It was about 8,000, maybe 10,000 people, something like that. I worked Wednesday nights and then like one day on the weekends. And small town, again, not very small, but not very big. You know everybody. You can tell when somebody's not from there. I still remember all of a sudden on Wednesday nights, these new people would show up, and they were different. They weren't from around there. They wore fancy clothes and nice shoes. And not only was that different, but they also bought cars in cash. That's not something that we were used to, or at least I wasn't used to. And so one day I remember selling this guy Mike a car. It was like Porsche, and I'd never seen it. He wrote a check for like 55 or 53,000 bucks, like it was nothing. And because it was a cash deal, I'm not allowed to ask what too much. But yeah, I'm 18. I got no sense and no tact for sure. And I was like, Mike, what is it you do? Because whatever it is, I can keep my mouth shut. Like I thought I was being funny, And he says, look, I work at a startup. It's called America Online. We have internships all summer. You should apply. Like it's unpaid, but give you a sense of what we do. And I was like, what? AOL? That's like for like nerds and stuff, right? That's not, my mom wouldn't even allow us to have the internet at the house. God forbid I talked to somebody that wasn't Indian or something like that. Joke's on her, right? I'm married to like as southern woman as they come. But anyway, so I applied for an internship, and it really wasn't anything fancy. I got to work in the IT department, nothing fancy. But here's the point of this story. The first day I walked into orientation there, I want to say this is like maybe 98 or something like that. The first day I walked into orientation there, I went from having that belief that there were 2 ways to make money to instantly realizing there was a third way to make money. And I'll explain first. So I walked in the door, if you can imagine it, you're looking into the reception desk. Over to the right is this big TV. Back in the late 90s, I'm aging myself, but there were no flat screen monitors. Every monitor was like this big thing.
Yep.
There was a rudimentary map of the United States on it, and what was happening was, and you could see it right away when you walked in. Every time somebody dialed in and connected to the internet, and for the listeners that remember that stuff, you remember your computer made this obnoxious sound, and then it connected. And what happened was that every time you did, a pin would drop on that screen. And here we were sitting in an old farm field in the middle of Ashburn, 40 miles outside the city, and a pin is dropping in Montana, in Maine, and New Mexico. And I'm like, holy cow, there's a third way to make money. The internet doesn't care where you're located. Place doesn't matter anymore. And anyway, my internship only lasted for that summer. And by the end of it, one of the other lessons I learned very quickly was that entrepreneurship was not reserved for rich people or white people or educated people. The lesson that I learned there that summer, the company was still relatively small. So, you could sit there and have a hot dog in the cafeteria next to like a senior exec or a founder of the company. And what you learned by the end of that like 3 or 4 month stint is that, they were very clear that people that worked at America Online were not any smarter than their peers all over the world. In fact, the only thing that was different was how many things they would try in a given time period. And it was really about iterating your way to success, personally, professionally, as a business, as a career, that sort of thing. And so that really stuck with me. And as I left, I was entering my freshman year at George Mason. And one of the skills I'd picked up along the way was this idea that, I could sell websites. I didn't know much about it at the time, but, back then, and here's my experience at George Mason, but maybe for the listeners that were in college, 98, 99, 2000, maybe you can relate. Back then, we were all assigned like a university website. So, as a CS major and a double E major, you were given like a little website. You could FTP stuff up to it. And that was cool for the majority of people. But for like the super nerds like me, you're like, oh, I don't want to have like a, vsing.gmu.edu as my URL. I want like, I don't know. I think my first blog was like dalandroti.com or something like that. And so I was like, this is so dumb. I could just like, I had like a computer at home that had a solid IP address. I just like, oh, I could just make this run at home. Anyway, it dawned on me that other people could do this. And I won't make it sound fancy. Back then, there was no real internet privacy. So if you knew somebody had a website, you could like look that up through what's called the Who Is system. their webmaster's phone number or email was on there, and I just made a commitment that I would try to call or email 200 of them a day and convert them at $8 a month. To me, that was a lot of money, especially when you add up like 100, 200 of these things over the course of a couple of weeks. Anyway, that's how I got started. I had a street MBA. I call it the street MBA because I just learned very quickly about revenue and expenses and accounting and, support and all these things. The long and short of that is that by 2004, 6 years into it, we'd gone from my basement to, 6 million square foot data centers. And, we were hosting a pretty significant portion of traffic and some well-known clients and stuff like that. And by that point, the industry had changed a little bit, and we pieced out the business a little bit. So, the insides of the data centers are leased out to other operators. It became more of a real estate play. I hired on a team to run it, and I just stepped out, and that's how it's been for the last 17, 18 years now as of this recording. It's it all kind of worked out, and it's sort of like a cash flow machine, and luck and hard work and timing and a lot of luck, I should say, twice there got me there. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'll just fast forward here a little bit. 2004 to 2008, I was a total, I don't know what I'm allowed to say on here.
You can say whatever you want.
I was a total asshole. 2004 to 2008, I made a little bit of money, and I, thought I was like, I could touch anything and make it gold. And you learn very quickly that that is not the case. And by 2008, started to kind of like get my feet under me and realize like, okay, there's got to be a method to this. And I just fast forwarding here a little bit, I started to think about this fact that, I don't know much about finance. I would argue I don't know much about it now, but back then I really didn't know much about it. I knew how to vet an entrepreneur like me, but I didn't know how to I didn't know how to model compounding, fees on, a wealth manager or something like that. I mean, hindsight is 2020. It's easy math. But so I decided that I would test out this thing called angel investing. And I didn't really know what that was, but I just started getting on airplanes. I heard about these things called demo days, right? I didn't know what that was, but I heard that at these demo days, you could see startups pitching and you could meet them. And so that's what I did. I just went I wasn't married, I wasn't, I didn't have any kids. I didn't have any of that stuff at the time. And so I just got on airplanes, started looking at deals or companies and entrepreneurs and starting investing in things. And over the next year or two, really started building a formula around it. I started asking myself questions about why do venture capitalists do things a certain way? Why do angels, other individuals like me, do things another way, a certain way? And so I started and I'm telling you this obviously with the clarity of hindsight, but I started to formulate this kind of loose theory that I called Moneyball for startups. If you ever saw that movie Moneyball about baseball, and the idea here was that you could find undervalued startups outside of Silicon Valley and then create a portfolio of them and hit a increase your likelihood for a hit, that sort of thing. So anyway, did that. That was the beginning of Results Junkies. The first investment in 2008 required me to set up an LLC, nothing fancy. And so I never thought Results Junkies would be a public name. I just was like, I just like people who like results, and it's a funny name, Junkies. I don't know. And so that's what it was. So that entity is still around. It sort of owns every one of my entrepreneurial efforts. All my failures are in there. All my wins are in there. I'm trying to think, so then by 2010, as I'm investing in about 200 new deals a year, I run into two other folks that are really smart, became one of the first 3 partners at a venture firm called 500. Really got to do some cool stuff with them and really, really refine even more of my thinking. And again, Results Junkies is independent, but, on the venture side, I was able to raise money, show people how to do it, hire on more people, invest in even more people than I could reach myself, help bring on the beginnings of the team. And by 2014, or maybe it's 2013, stepped away. And fast forward a little bit, really started to kind of go through more of a dark period in my life, wondering what in the world I was going to do next. Everybody I'd ever met in venture, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but by 2014, 2015, my first kid was born in 2014, and I don't know, I was just lost. It was really dark back then because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. Too much of my ego had become my work. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. Arguably, the people around me didn't like what they saw either, and led to a divorce, and it was just awful. And I just, classic Indian family thing, you're ostracized by the entire community. Professionally, you're an asshole. Nobody wants to talk to you. You've neglected your friends for so long that they stopped texting you. God, your mom and dad are so embarrassed of, the failure that their eldest son has. And so, to be honest with you, I ran, and I was like, well, I wanted to run. The reality is I had to do something. I had a little girl, and I needed to be a dad, and I needed to, like find out what I wanted to do professionally. And so the long story there is I ended up buying an RV, and I decided that I would travel. I've always enjoyed travel. I find that my biggest ideas come from travel, whether it's on an airplane or a long road trip. Um, that there's some comfort that I find in being in different places that I've never been before. And I had never, I mean, up until that point, I was flying 500,000 miles a year like it was nothing. Can't do that with an infant, right? So now it's like, okay, well, let's do an RV. And so that's what I did. I bought an RV. I committed to living 1 week or in a city for a week at a time for as long as I possibly could. It was awesome. Met my now wife, traveled I thought I'd do it for a year. We did it all the way through early 2018, I think. So three and a half years, 7 or 8 loops of the U.S. and Canada, living in the thing that we drove around, and bringing my daughter along where we could, and then settled back down here at home in Ashburn, Virginia, where I grew up, because I wanted to get married again. I wanted to have more kids, and I wanted all the kids to be together and the grandparents to be nearby. And so it was awesome. Found myself, found my family. Grew up a lot, and but as I started to do that, I also noticed we'd gotten pregnant with my second and our first, and started to notice and again with the clarity of hindsight how difficult it was for my wife to like pregnancy is obviously a magical thing. I think I say that as a guy that's never been pregnant, but I've been around it enough, and it's supposed to be this magical thing, and in many ways it is. But gosh, the experience is not smooth. Like in any other industry, if we treated customers this way, nobody would accept it. But somehow it's okay. I noticed as I was watching my wife go through all this, was like, wait, you scheduled an appointment with the OB 3 weeks ago and they were still 45 minutes late. Like where is that okay? So anyway, so in hindsight, I started looking at this. I talked to my wife for a while, and started to again hindsight of clarity and that sort of thing, or clarity of hindsight. Started thinking about like, well, why I invest in all these companies, all these industries that we're in, they almost always get it disrupted. Why in the world is an industry like women's health and just women's interests as a whole so fragmented? So the long and short of it is, I came to this like kind of hypothesis that 3 reasons that why women's health, women's interests had not like massively improved like many other industries. Number one, you don't see a huge influx of talent or technical talent jumping across the river. Like, in other words, you don't see a ton of Googlers leaving. This is an illustrative example, but you don't see a ton of like Googlers or Uber people or engineers leaving to go start something. Maybe that's a exaggeration, but hopefully nobody will find the math here. But you don't just see a lot of that, right? Secondly, you don't see a lot of venture capital. For better or for worse, there's not a lot of early stage capital available in that space. Even though, ironically, women make up half the planet, it's still considered a niche, okay? And so that struck me. And then the third and perhaps most interesting thing that struck me was that the incumbents in almost any industry that touches women's health, women's interests, are unlike any other incumbent anywhere else. They are 100+ years old. You look at the example of like Procter and Gamble, 187-year-old, 188-year-old company. It's hard to compete against that. I mean, sure, there have been some big wins, like, let's just call it like Dollar Shave Club and CPG and all these other things, right? But the reality is that it's hard to compete with that when you have investors that have quarterly outlooks on returns, and you're dealing with an incumbent that has almost a $400 billion market cap, 187-year timeline. They can take bets that no funded startup can't. So anyway, fast forward to where we are today, came to the conclusion that the only way to do anything interesting there was to build a bootstrapped company that didn't raise money from the outside, that stacked the revenue. And it sort of asked myself, like, what would the modern day Procter and Gamble look like if it didn't have, or if it did have a deep understanding of today's tech, a deep understanding of today's digitally native mothers, and no legacy baggage, stakeholders or any of that stuff. So anyway, that's the last 20, 25 years and whatever it is, 7, 8, 10 minutes or whatever, 20 minutes, I guess. Gosh.
Yeah.
And yeah, the summary of all that is I just sort of tripped and stumbled and found my way here. That's it.
Yeah. Going back to the beginning, you mentioned your dad was the owner of a construction company. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How did he get into that? He just joined a company and then after several years started his own, or do you know how that formed?
Yeah, the high level is you just nailed the high level. So he, when he first came here, he was like the youngest of like 7 brothers, but maybe it was 5 brothers and a couple sisters. And yeah, so he worked at like a masonry company here. It was called like LH something. I can see the name in my head, but anyway, like he worked as a bricklayer for one of these companies, and then eventually sort of like struck out on his own and nothing crazy, right? Like a very like sort of humble thing. Like we never had more than a truck. He had a hard time trusting other people. His first partner had sort of, so this is hard because, my parents and maybe other like immigrant families can relate. They don't really share all the details. You hear kind of what they want to hear you to hear, and otherwise you only hear the rest behind closed doors when they don't think you're listening, right? And so as I understand it, he sort of went into business with somebody, an American guy here, and the long and short of it is that one day he woke up and like all the tools and everything were gone, and it really, he's my dad's, I would say a good guy, but he also like that distrust of anybody after that really, really stuck around with him. I think even to this day, it's like trust no one, verify everything. In many ways that's a strength, but in a lot of other ways, it's a big weakness too, and it really affected even like the friendships I was allowed to have, don't trust this person, don't trust that person, and I think, not blaming anybody, but, in hindsight, it takes a lot of therapy to figure out like, oh, I wonder why I don't have long-term friendships. Huh. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the
Yeah.
mental model I grew up with. Got it. Got it.
You've been,
Okay.
yeah,
Right.
since a young kid.
Yeah. Everybody's going to screw you. Right. Ah, yes. I got to get that out of my head.
Yeah.
So,
I'm curious. So you had that juxtaposed with your mom working for a credit union. I'm curious, did you understand as a young kid what entrepreneurship was? Like, was it on your mind as something you wanted to do? Or was it kind of, as you talked about, the AOL experience really shined your interest?
I'm 100% confident that if you time traveled back to, 15 or 16-year-old me and you said, do you know what entrepreneurship is? I would have said, absolutely not. Everything I knew about entrepreneurship at that point was really what you saw on the magazine stand while you paid the gas station guy $20 on pump 3. And what did you see? I mean, this was like one of the things that it really sticks out to me in hindsight is that I still remember, again, AOL at the time was a very small place. I mean, but small by comparison to what it became, right? Like at its peak, it was 6,000 people. But I think around the time that I was in there, I mean, it must have been 300 or 400 people, maybe 5. I mean, it was not 1,000 people. But anyway, I still remember, there was a cafeteria here, and in that facility is, 3 miles from here probably is the Bird Flies, and there was a cafeteria right there in the center of the campus, and I still remember, when I would go get gas in my car, you would walk down the magazine aisle on the way to the 7-Eleven gas station register, and you'd see like Entrepreneur Magazine or whatever that was called. And you'd see the face of Steve Case. And it's like the visionary or fraud, because at that time in the 90s, people weren't sure if the internet was a real thing or just like a fad, But, as a kid, and I don't know if you would disagree with me on this, but, as a kid, so much of our worldview is modeled after not only what we hear, but what we see. And at that time, as a Indian guy in a predominantly white, not, like, there was nobody else, we would see other Indian people at, church on Sundays, but that's about the extent of it. The other 6 days of the week, you're surrounded by not that.
Yep.
So, but you go down these magazine aisles and what do you see? You see white men and women very clean cut, nicely dressed. They say these big words like visionaries and all these things, and you're like, man, they don't look like me. That's not me. Like my uncle drives a cab. My
Yeah.
dad's a bricklayer. And but here's the point, I still remember like sitting in that cafeteria, and this guy doesn't remember it at all. And so Steve Case is one of the founders, or I guess the founder of AOL. He won't remember this. I mean, I was like a nobody, and so uh, you know, when I got gas, I would see his face on these magazines, and he was so put together. Like that's what my mental model was. You have to be put together. You have to have a lot of money. You have to have these clothes that these white guys wear. But then I like remember looking at him in the cafeteria one day, and he's like eating a hot dog. I'm just a very visual person, right? And Steve, if you ever listen to this, I mean nothing but a compliment what I'm about to say. But in my mind's eye, what I remember like 22, 23 years ago is a guy wearing like a baggy, ill-fitting button-up shirt with a short sleeves, wearing cargo shorts. And I remember thinking like, what in the world does he have to carry around in those things? And then like flip flops and like chewing with his mouth open. And like, I don't mean that in any condescending way. What I mean is he was normal, absolutely normal. And in hindsight, that was probably like what I would say is the beginning of, what I would personally call the idea virus, where it was like, well, wait a second. Like, it's not like those magazines. These people only look like visionaries in hindsight. Nobody, Steve, I don't think he never called himself a visionary to the team when he did his all hands and stuff like that. So anyway, the point is I think so much of our mental models are built around not only what we hear and experience and feel as we grow up, but also what we see. And I think a lot about that, with my kids. I've got a 7-year-old right now, a 2.5-year-old, a 7-year-old girl, 2.5-year-old boy, and a 9-month-old boy. And particularly for my girl, I think it's really neat that like when my sister grew up, she was the only mental or the only visual model she really had in the 80s of women when you turn on the TV was like, newscaster, secretary. I know these are stereotypes, right? But now counterimpose that to like what my daughter will see when she turns on the TV these days. Like you've got women CEOs in the Fortune 500. You've got, women judges and, like women running for all levels of office of the country. Like that's just amazing because I think that it implicitly sets the I can do this too thing. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling here, but yeah, entrepreneurship was not a household word that we used. In fact, actually, I'll say one other thing. In fact, like when I started my first company, my parents thought it was the worst idea in the world. There was a lot of comparisons being thrown at me, like, well, so-and-so's son is, at Lockheed and,
Yeah.
He's driving a BMW at 22. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, I wake up when I'm ready to wake up now. I don't have, like my boss is my customer. I feel pretty good about it. But, I think that's like sort of the juxtaposition of like the careers of our parents and the careers of us. Like status symbols of our parents, I think, are what you have and how shiny the black SUV is and how many square feet the house is. And I think for the generation that I'm part of and maybe the generation beyond me, I think we optimize for experience, and I don't want a lot of things. I want freedom. I value freedom and experiences over stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
uh,
I'm curious, the CarMax job ends up being pretty important in your life because, you learn of, what the individual does who's buying the Porsche, and then you end up getting an unpaid internship at AOL, which leads to the data center, et cetera, et cetera. What was the incentive to have a part-time job as like a high schooler? What made you go to
money,
CarMax? Okay.
money.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, so, uh, so a couple things, right? So my first job was at Papa John's making pizzas, when I was 16, and then I worked at Best Buy selling, I think cell phones or something like that. And then Circuit City had announced they wanted to start a car business, and I was like, "Oh, I could learn how to drive other people's cars," and I liked it because you didn't have to negotiate. It's a fixed price system, and really liked that. And anyway, I just thought, like as a kid, I'm like, man, I can make $150 a car just for like being there, and there's only like 15 sales guys. Man, this is shooting fish in a barrel. Um, In hindsight, though, the most valuable experience was not what you just described. I mean, I certainly think that was one of the outcomes of it, but that was not the experience that has been the most useful to me. The thing that was most useful to me was like learning how to talk to people. Around that time, I started formulating this idea. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I have no science to back it up. I have no way to prove to you what I'm about to tell you is true. But the thing I take away the most from my time back then is that it started to this idea in me that like I I hesitate because what I'm about to sound is going to make me sound like a crazy person, but what I'm about to tell you is what I call the 3 rules of the invisible game that have helped my career for the last 23, 24, 25 years. So, as I learned to talk to people, you can't sell stuff and be shy, right? And I'm believe it or not, I'm an introvert. I am an introvert. Like I've done, every test, Myers-Briggs, whatever. I'm like ENTP, but borderline E. I'm mostly I, right? I probably, I don't know. I probably took the test on a bad day. It was an E. But anyway, but you have to learn as you sell cars that you have to turn it on. You can't be an introvert, and I was motivated by money because I didn't, my parents, again, we weren't poor, we weren't rich, but my parents also knew the value of a dollar and they weren't going to give me an allowance. So if I wanted my dad to cut my hair versus pay for my own haircut, I better go make some money. Um, so, okay, as I was like learning how to talk to people, what I learned very quickly was a couple things. But the most important one is what I called this idea that there's a game that everybody wants you to play. There's an invisible game that the best people or the most successful people are playing. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but let me just kind of like outline it. And so, this invisible game that I believe the most successful people use, what I found is that there are 3 rules they all seem to follow. Again, let me just go through the rules and then I'll kind of try to justify it and not sound like a crazy person. So, the 3 rules of the invisible game. Rule number 1 is your brand, personally and professionally, is not what you say it is. It's how others perceive you. Mm. Rule number 2, you never pick a fight with an elephant head on. I know it's a cliche, but you eat the elephant one bite at a time, usually from the side. And the third rule is that if you understand the hopes, fears, and dreams of the person sitting across the table from you in anything, you win. Whatever you want to do, negotiate, argue, debate, whatever, you win. So let me pause there and kind of explain. So I'll just use an illustrative example. So here I am, I'm like 17, 18 years old. My parents tell me you got to work hard, study hard, and that's how you get success after you put in your time. But I'm looking at these people that seem to be 5 and 10 years older than me, writing checks bigger than I've ever seen for cars that I would have dreamt to have. These people were not working any harder than me. In fact, what they were doing was a various combo of things that like ultimately led me to believe that there was an invisible game. Now, I will admit, I don't think people are consciously playing the invisible game, but I think that it's kind of like charisma. You're not born with it, but there are like traits that you can pick up, that can like lead others to believe that you are charismatic. And so anyway, like, for example, hard workers at AOL didn't get paid the big bucks. It was the people willing to like make the hard decisions, the people that were willing to bet something big, including their own careers, knowing that the outcome could have been bigger, if they got it right. And so anyway, the long and short of it is that, the easy, sort of like dotted line back to my career, it could be that I met the right person at CarMax. But to me, that is mostly about luck. I was standing at the door at the right day at the right time. That was pure luck. The more interesting and I think repeatable thing that others listening to this should take away is that I think everybody should have a sales job. That's it. That's the advice. Everybody should have a sales job because like if you never want to be at risk of layoff, stay on the sales side of the organization. If you never want to be at the risk of like getting terminated for somebody else's mistake on a business decision, get on the sales side. Like most of the professional anxiety that people have would be resolved if they would just embrace the idea that sales, however you interpret that, sales people tend to be the ones that are saved. They're the ones that like can pull company, like revenue solves a lot of problems, but also the skills you learn about managing people and their emotions and their, um, you know, decisions like that's a very powerful thing. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling here, but I do think everybody should have a sales job at some point. It's
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah. So you talked about it a little bit, from 1998 to 2004, you're building basically a data center hosting company. Can you speak about, you know, how you grew that? I think you were going to school at the same time, and you know, what gets it to the level that, in 2004 someone's acquiring the company from you.
Okay, so the two, so there's obviously the complete answer, which we probably don't have time for today, but then there's like probably the two big things I think are important to understand. The first is that I learned very quickly at AOL that, it was number of iterations that really mattered. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's the right decision. And the implicit thing you sort of learned back then was that time can be, or money can be replaced or re-earned. Time cannot be. So, lesson number one from that period of my life is that it was very simple. Our success was determined solely by my ability to call or email 200 webmasters a day. It's a numbers game. Not all 200 of them are going to pick up the phone or respond to the email or even say yes, but a percentage of them will. And depending on your pitch that day, your tone that day, the luck that day, might be 3%, could be 22%. Who knows? So that was like the first big recognition is that like speed and iteration really matter more than like anything else. The second big sort of lesson learned was that, what comes with all these, so these were all like $8 accounts, which again, this is almost embarrassing to say, like when I set my price for like shared hosting and stuff like that, it was built on this idea that a Wendy's number 6, which is a spicy chicken sandwich. So Wendy's number 6 with a large fry and a large Coke with taxes was like just under $8. And I thought for sure if I got $8 off of every deal or off of every customer, that would be a good deal. What I didn't take into account was like expenses. Now, good news is that expenses were relatively low for hosting. But what I learned is, and there's a point to this, is that the less somebody pays you, the more of a pain in the ass they're going to be. And the second big lesson, that leads me to like now the second big lesson. So if the first big lesson was just you control your future, like, activity, like I always say, like the biggest lesson there is like, high activity leads to low anxiety and low anxiety and high anxiety usually leads to low anxiety, like whatever. I think I said that
Low
right.
activity. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So the point is 200 outbound would like lead me to control my future. That led me to the second observation, which is that like, one day, one of our clients, had emailed support and this, that, and the other. And I had to get to the data center in the middle of the night to kind of reboot a server or something like that. And I called the guy back and, hey, it's fixed. So sorry. It's like 3 a.m. on a Saturday. Now I got to drive back home to my parents' house. It's like 3 a.m, and I'm just tired. And he says, hey, thanks, man. Thanks. He's like, hey, by the way, you're charging me too little, right? And I was like, wait, what? It's like 3 a.m. on a Saturday. I'm like, wait, what? What did you say? And he's like, no, I'm not going to talk to you about it now, man. I'm sleeping. But talk to my secretary. Call me on Monday, whatever, and I'll talk to you. And I was like, okay. So I call him back on Monday, and I was like, hey, like, I don't know what that means. Like, talk to me. What does that mean? He goes like, look. He's like, I'm an IT. I'm like a really high IT exec at this Fortune 1000 company. So they make a lot of money. He's like, you're charging me $8. It's too little. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, I thought that's why you buy this stuff. And he's like, you're misunderstanding. He goes, and this, I promise there's a second lesson in this. He goes, why do you think I buy from you? And I said, well, because we have the best price. And he said, no, one more time. And I was like, because we got like the latest version of Linux on all the servers and da da da. He's like, no. And I was like, okay, why? He goes, well, because look, if you fail in the middle of the night, I get to blame you, the vendor. And I was like, well, like, I don't understand. What does that have to do with the price you pay me? And he's like, look, what you need to understand is that, like, we're worth a certain amount of money. Like, they're a publicly traded, Fortune 1000, right? He's like, you got to understand, like, we have a lot of money for this stuff. We're not optimizing for price. Honestly, when we got the referral to you guys, what the other guys were saying was that, like, the site never goes down, and when it does, like, you guys are always around. So we thought, price aside, like, hey, that's what we need. Like, if something goes wrong with our website, we need to be able to blame somebody else, but also have, like, somebody else turning the buttons and stuff like that. So I was like, where are you going with this? And I'll never forget what he said. Now, I don't remember his name. He probably doesn't remember me. We've never talked since that day. He said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Paul, everybody competes on price. Everybody competes on the long tail. They think that's where they should start. When in fact, what they don't realize is you should compete at the top because there's very little competition up there. And I was like, I don't, okay. He's like, it won't make sense now. Just think about it. He goes, look, I would pay you $10,000 a month for the service you provide without batting an eyelash. And it changed everything for me. And I, within a few days, changed all the pricing for our top tier clients and really started to, like, trip and stumble, but learn my way around, like, why certain kinds of people buy and why other people buy, right? And so, like, we very quickly tried to position ourselves as, like, the top of the market. $10,000 per inch in the rack plus bandwidth. So we were very expensive, and we started to build in, like, global load balancing and all sorts of fancy jargony terms that we created. And it changed. So anyway, all that to say, lesson number one that I take away from that was that our success was a function of the number of things we did. And in the early days, just picking up the phone 200 times a day was great. The compounding effect of that was inevitable. And the second big lesson was that there is more, counterintuitively, there is more competition the lower your price is. And rather, what you should do is aim for the top of the market, the top of the prices, and add more features. Like, this is so true for, like, anybody listening to this that is consulting. Inevitably, everybody that consults for anybody, like, whether it's for hours or retainers or whatever, they inevitably are like, how do I raise my price? The key is add more. Add more. It could be more brand. It could be more of a service. It could be a lot of different things, but just add more and compete to be at the top, because there might be like 10 competitors at the top. And I know that doesn't sound appealing, but at the bottom, in terms of where the price is very competitive, there's probably 1,000. And which would you rather compete with? That's the counterintuitive lesson that I picked up, or lesson number two that was counterintuitive that I wouldn't have learned any other way, I don't think. So hopefully people are sticking around and picking this up, man, because I haven't talked about this stuff in like 20 years now. So
hey, I'm, as we talked about oh 04, you sell the company. Is there a way to know about right timing with selling a business?
No, and we didn't really sell all of it. We kept the real estate. We pieced out the inside because, like, I didn't want to negotiate power and all those other things. Look, I don't think any entrepreneur wakes up thinking, gosh, I wish I had just hung on longer. I mean, well, I think the woulda, coulda, shouldas are, man, if you let those into your head, you'll never sleep another day in your life. I made the right decision at the right time based on what I wanted to do with my life at that point, and never really looked back. I'm very thankful because the proceeds of that still to this day help me invest in all the companies I want to invest in. And yeah, I mean, look, here's the deal. When I think about those kinds of things, I think there are only two things. So I think that everything is reversible except for legal and finance. Anything that's related to legal and finance is a little harder to reverse. And so you kind of have to, like, think about it that way. So, like, for most decisions, just pick a path. You can undo it. Not a big deal. Gosh, I bought the wrong car. Like, is it perfect? Is it ideal to, like, trade it in the next month? No, but you can reverse it. It's not the end of the world. Legal and finance are a little bit different, right? You sold the company. Undoing that's very hard. So think about what you want. Like, at the time, in hindsight, at that time, I was like, man, I gotta like sign on new clients. I gotta manage the clients. I gotta deal with the teams and lots of different people that like you need account managers, you need account executives, you need like lobbyists that help with like the power arrangements with the county and like all the state and the government. And I'm like, man, I'm like 24. That's not exciting to me. What was exciting to me was like growing it and so I'm like, oh, we could have like a little cash flow machine here. Um, and I'm like, I remember talking to like some of my dad's friends, mom and dad's friends, like classic Indian families that had like, friends that owned gas stations. And what stuck with me at the time, I remember was like all these people that owned gas stations didn't own the dirt underneath them. Gas stations are typically like on 99-year leases with whoever actually owns the land underneath it. Um, and I was like, wait a second, that concept could be applied right here.
Yeah.
I could get all see because if you think about it, the internet is dominated by the laws of physics. The cloud has to exist somewhere, and the laws of physics mean or suggest that they have to be close to each other. So if you own the dirt, you own the cloud. And it was like an interesting observation. I'm like, I can like make like 60-70% of the money and do like 10% of the work. Oh. Which, by the way, is its own sort of like mind fuckery, pardon my language, because your whole mental model is hard work, Indian family, hard work. And you're like, I just found a way to make more money doing less. Am I a bad person? um, but anyway, that's probably another story from my therapist or something. I don't know. Yeah, but look, here's the lesson for other people listening. I think the reality is that you can't know the future. So don't like I think people obsess over like what could have happened, what should have happened. The truth is that like all you can really do is take comfort in the fact that as long as you're making decisions based on all the decision available to you at the time and you feel like that's the right decision, just say yes. I still to this day, when people ask me something, I always say, look, my default answer is yes. I might have even said it to you in an email. I don't know. But like I always say to people when they ask me something, it could be anything. I'm like, look, my default answer is yes. So now where do you want to go with that? Now I can't actually say yes to everything, but the reality is like I always start from the position of yes, let's see. And that I think is an interesting way to make sure that you make your own luck. In hindsight, there really is no luck. I think that luck is really if you put yourself out there enough, opportunities present themselves, and in hindsight, that gets called luck. But you wouldn't get that if you didn't put yourself out there. If you didn't like stand there on a Wednesday at a CarMax selling cars, you know. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, so hopefully I'm not
No,
taking
yeah.
you where you
So
don't want
I
to go
mean,
here.
um, two more questions, I guess. So were you working and going to school at this time?
Yeah, so I
Okay.
had to pay my way through school. I was too lazy to apply for scholarships, and my parents I think would have helped me with school, but I think that I also had too much pride, and I didn't want my parents telling me what to do and that sort of thing. So yeah, I paid my way semester by semester, and I had to work to make it happen. And in hindsight, totally worth it. At the time I thought it was worth it because I was like, oh yeah, my parents will never tell me what to do. This is great. But in hindsight, the benefits were far greater than that. And I realize not everybody's lucky enough to do that. But the cost at George Mason was very low. Like a full load of tuition back then was like, I think 12 or 13 credits a semester was like probably $3,000, which to me was a lot of money at the time, but it was totally attainable. I mean, that was 20 cars. I could sell 34 cars a month and 20 cars and I could pay for the semester. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. The other
So
question, yeah, the other question I had was like, what was the point where you like, obviously you started out small and then you got like more serious about it. And I'm sure you had other hustles like, selling like at a certain point you dedicated yourself to this business. What was that point? What were the factors? Was it just gut intuition?
So if I want to make sure I understand the question. So the question is, at what point did I know to like go all in, or
Well, yeah, I mean, because I'm sure you started out in '98, you had, some clients, but and you were making some money, but then eventually I'm sure this was your main focus outside of
Very
school.
quickly. Yeah,
Yeah.
very quickly. Because like the thing about me, and I think I'm pretty open about this with people, is like I I'm half joking and half serious when I say this, and I've said it for like 20 plus years now. Is like I'm like unemployable. Um,
Yeah.
I think that, and I think a lot of people do say that, but they're not willing to like accept what comes with that statement. So I'm unemployable in the sense that I fear irrelevancy. I fear um, it's not that I fear control as much as I fear not having control over all the things that could adversely affect me. Um, to me, this became like the only logical way to build the life that I really wanted. And like, I like, I could not, in my mind, I could not understand like how anybody would subject themselves to a life where you would have to ask somebody for a raise every year. And I know a lot of people have to do it. I get it. I get it. But I think that we're at this point now of civilization where I think that more people should have a side hustle. I think that okay. So let me say it to you this way. Um, I'm stealing this phrase from somebody, but like I sort of stumbled across a similar version of it, 20 plus years ago. To your question of like, you know, when did I decide to drop out, to drop all into this, um, I guess early on in my life, I had this idea in my head of what was typically called "fuck you" money. Now, again, I bleep me out. I hope I don't
No,
make
no,
this
you're good.
podcast
No,
explicit
no.
here, but
Yeah,
um,
that's
but so my concept of "fuck you" money back then was like, oh, lifestyles of the rich and famous, $100 million, da da da. And it didn't take me long to realize after I started selling stuff for websites, I'm like, wait a second. So here's where I'm going with this. And it's funny because I still feel weird talking about money. Like it's somehow it's taboo in our society to talk about money. And I still feel weird talking about it. But like, um, so across the street from the CarMax here in Ashburn, if anybody goes on Google Maps and you go to like CarMax, Ashburn, Virginia, zoom out just one level. And what you'll see is across the parking lot is the Ferrari and Lamborghini dealership. Like it's the weirdest thing, and it's because like the Redskins training camp, or now the Washington football team training camp is like 2 miles down the road, and it's the weirdest thing. So like in my mind, growing up, I'm like, Ferraris are for like rich people, like $500,000. Like who would spend that money on a car? Like I'm driving a Toyota 4Runner, very practical. Um, and so, like we'd all like in between the two dealerships, there's like a little strip mall with like the restaurants, and you can kind of again on Google Maps, you can see like there's like a Burger King and all these other fast food joints. So inevitably, you would end up running into like other salespeople from those other locations, like at the Burger King, right? And so, here you are, like 17 years old. You're like, man, what's it like to, like, man, I sold a car to AOL. They're like $50,000. It's a big deal. And then like the um, the Lambo and Ferrari salespeople that are at the Burger King or whatever, like, so dumb. None of our guys spend cash. And I was like, what? What do you mean? I thought, like, isn't being rich about having money? And they're like, oh, no, everybody finances it. It's like, what? What are you talking? What? Okay, tell me more. And they're like, oh, look, and I still remember one of the sales guys was like, Paul, what do you think like this Ferrari's worth? And I don't know. Look, I still drive like a pickup, right? But like I and I don't get me wrong, I like nice things, but man, as I get older, I'm like, I don't want to maintain anything, I'd rather like hang out with my kids and like, go for a walk. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
turning into
hey,
that geriatric millennial or something like
hey,
that.
hey.
It's like I want to have a beer with my wife, I'm good.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so anyway, I'll never forget. I think it was like, I don't know enough about Ferraris, but anyway, it was like, it was like a $250,000 car, and it was brand new, beautiful Ferrari red. He walks me over to it and he goes, "How much do you think this is?" And I was like, and I looked at the window sticker. I'm like, okay, with options, it's like $287,000. So with tax plus sex, whatever. Um, he goes, "Oh, no, 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 it's like 3 grand a month." I was like, "What? How does that work?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah. These are like exotic cars. So these guys are like on 20-year leases. Da 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 da." He starts telling, and I'm like, "Wait a second. You're telling me to drive a Ferrari, I don't need to have like $300,000. I need 3,000 a month." And the point of this story is it was one of the pivotal moments. That story is one of the pivotal moments where my definition of fuck you money changed. Fuck you money was about making enough money to cover my expenses and never being letting anybody ever control me ever again. So like I could say fuck you. Not to say that you want to do that, right? You shouldn't go around burning
Just
bridges, right? But I
yeah,
think
but be in control.
be in control. And I think the counterintuitive thing that I experienced, and I bet you a lot of other people experience, is that if you can, especially early in your career, if you can recognize that keeping your burn rate low, your personal burn rate low, enables you to get to that fuck you level faster. God, that is profound, because the counterintuitive result of that is that you will take bigger bets in your career and inevitably come out more successful than your peers.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that technically that idea is accessible to almost anybody today. Now, obviously, like, I'm 40, and if I was to start now, I got to think about 3 kids and a mortgage and all that. I realize it's not easy, but it is simple. Like, what your expenses are. Like, here's how I think about everything now. When I think about a side project or a side anything I do, anything at all, like I still tinker these days. I think like, okay, what is my personal burn rate today? For me to not kill this side project within a month or two, it's got to hit that burn rate. And it's a very like, it's not easy, but it's a very simple way of looking at things, where it's like, I think everybody listen, like, okay, just as an example here, if somebody listening to this right now is, let's just use an illustrative example. Let's say somebody right now is listening to this and they're like a bookkeeper at some firm. I'm making this up, right?
Yeah.
You can obviously keep doing what you're doing because you're obviously good at it, and like, make sure that you do your job, keep your head down, make sure your boss is happy, and hope that the company doesn't make a bad decision, hope that another 2008 doesn't happen again, and you can kind of just live your merry life, and that is okay. Totally okay. But for the more enterprising people listening to this that are sitting in a very similar situation, what you should understand is that a side hustle doesn't have to be big. Somewhere out there is a part-time, or somewhere out there is some company that is looking for a part-time bookkeeper or a part-time accountant or part-time whatever, willing to pay $1,000 a month just to have you kind of like keep their books in line. They don't really care when you get it done. There's a blog post on this, or a similar topic, that really shaped my thinking on this about 15 years ago. It's called 1,000 True Fans. And I forget now who wrote it, but if you Google 1,000 True Fans, you'll see the original version of it. And then there was an updated one a couple of years ago. But the concept is the same, is that for most people listening to this podcast, you probably have some skill that 1,000 people somewhere on the internet want to buy. Find them. You don't have to make that a full-time job. But if you can systematically put 30 minutes to it every day, or 15 minutes to it every day, or whatever, it compounds,
Yeah.
And I think more people should embrace that side hustle. It should not be like a bad thing.
Yeah. The last
By the way, let me
question
say, sorry, can I just say one other thing? And you edit this out if it's like super dumb. But here's the thing. Like, Punjabi is my first language. English is my second language. And, the thing that I can't help but understand nowadays is that entrepreneur, like, English is the only language on the planet where entrepreneur is a noun. There is no equivalent to it in Eastern languages or Spanish or Portuguese. I mean, maybe more recently there's like slang, but the truth is, think about it. And again, somebody out here is going to, like, some linguist in your audience is going to be like, Paul, you're totally wrong, right? But here's the deal.
Yeah.
In every other culture, the closest translation, the closest word for entrepreneur is a verb.
Yeah.
As a society, the United States, which I love, by the way, I'm Team USA, all that stuff, right? But we are the only country on the planet where entrepreneur is like a thing we put in our LinkedIn profile. But that shop owner in India doesn't put that on their profile.
Yeah.
The point here is that entrepreneurship is more about a way you think. It's not who you are. It is not a binary thing. It is not a noun. It is not whether you are or not are not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is a way you think. It is not reserved for the people that start companies, which the common vernacular would have you believe. Entrepreneurship can be embraced by all forms of people, whether you're sitting in a cubicle and doing that side hustle, whether you decide to take the leap and start something new, whether you know what I'm saying? Like, I think
Yeah,
that's a key
yeah,
thing for
yeah.
people to understand is that
We have to
it's
challenge
not who you
ourselves.
are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
The other big question I had was, do you have any pieces of advice? You were very young at that time, and you were like, as you were saying, 23, 24 when you were selling it. So you were probably like 17 or 18 when you started it. Growing a business as a young individual. um Obviously your business was in data centers, so I mean, just anything on the data center business, on advice, as a young person growing a company. I'm sure you managed people that were older than you. I'm sure you had to hire people that were older than you. They had to trust you in your business model. Anything to those questions?
Yeah, it's a big one. I'll try to keep it crisp. Uh, okay, so two things come to mind, like right off the bat when you ask that question. The first is that um, the only people that really want you to believe something is complicated, in my view, tend to be the people that want to keep you out of an industry. That could be your competitors. It could also be your family. And we can come back to that if you like. But then the second part, I would say to the second part of your question, I would say, uh, you know, like, you know, managing people that are older than you, or more experienced than you, whatever. Like, uh, it's not as hard, or not as like you're probably gonna. We make it hard for ourselves. Like, it's our own mental models of like, you know, why, it's our own, like, maybe self-doubt. Like, I'm not a therapist or psychologist, right? But I think it's our own, like, sort of self-doubt maybe in our own psychology that leads us to believe that it must be weird to manage people that have more experience or not. But the truth is, like, I think great people want to be led. They don't really care what you look like, or what they want to know is like, um, well, anyway, I don't know if I have an articulate thought on this, but the point of it all though is that I think most businesses, like, if okay, so this leads me to something else or something related to it, right? But to your point, like I do think that people want to keep you out of it, and a lot of them mean well, by the way. So, like, obviously some of your competitors are going to want to make something seem complicated, um, but also your family. Like, my parents were like very, like, they meant very well, but they were very worried, right? Like, to them, they took all this risk to come on a one-way ticket to America. They took all this risk, and so naturally they don't want their kid to take more risk. But the truth is, like, like, I don't know, I think counterintuitively, you do have more risk if you work at Lockheed. I mean, you're one government shutdown away from a furlough. You're one project expiration away from benched, Nobody wants to talk about it, right? Because, like, you got all the trappings. You got the Range Rover and the big car and all that stuff. Um, Look, let's just talk about data centers for a minute, just to make the illustrative point. All right, rhetorical question for the audience, but I'm going to ask it and I'm going to pause for like 2 seconds. What is a data center? And if you want, if you were bold enough to take a guess, right, you probably had these conjurings in your mind of like very sophisticated, like amazing facilities that like are battle hardened or whatever. But let me tell you, it's literally a warehouse with four walls. They cost about 50 grand to stand up. Well, at least back then they did. Now it's a lot different. But I'm telling you, back then, you had to understand, the people were telling me like, you can't do this. Like, why would you do this? Da da da. Like, you know, uh, how, like, when people give you advice, there's always like an ounce of truth and an ounce of like lie in everything that people tell you. I mean, that's something I've always thought about. It's like everything people tell you, whether they mean it well or not, there's always an ounce of truth and an ounce of lie in there. You just have to figure out which part of it is. I remember my dad used to say, like, we never lease a car. Never lease a car. And I was like, what? Why? He's like, well, you don't own anything. And I'm like, but okay. All right, whatever. I don't care. Whatever. I'll buy it and finance. I don't really care, Dad. It's fine. But then, like, as I'm building my business and I'm moving my server out of my dad's or my parents' basement and I'm renting a closet at another data center nearby, as that closet grows, I'm looking at it and I'm like, what am I paying for this? Like, And then I'm like looking at like commercial loans for a warehouse, and I'm like seeing these prefab buildings back then for like 50 grand, like the small ones, not big, but like prefab, four concrete walls and a pad, suspended ceiling. That's like 50 or 60 grand at the time. And the dirt is like 20 grand because nobody wants to be out here at the time. And I'm like, wait, like a commercial loan on that is way less. What? Wait, and then going back to my dad's words, I'm like, why would I lease this? I don't own anything. So I go down to the bank, and the bank's like, well, sir, you don't have any credit. You're a young, whatever. I'm like, well, I got this like Forerunner that's paid off. Can I use that as collateral? And like, it wasn't anything fancy, by the way. It was like half beat up. I mean, I missed that car so much. Someday I'll find it with the VIN number or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, look, I'll put that up, and like, I mean, I can like come up with like 10K or something, and like put, now, 20% down or 15% down plus the car. Would that change it? And it's like, well, yeah, as long as you put a personal guarantee. And I'm like, I'm 18. I got nothing to lose. If I go bankrupt, I can make it all again.
Yeah.
Not smart, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but like it wasn't easy, but it was simple. And everybody that told me it was hard either had a vested interest in keeping me out, like the people that own the data center that I was renting from. They're like, no, you don't want to do that. Like, no, 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 no. Very hard, very complicated. And my parents didn't like it. Well, is it too much risk? Like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, you need to buy a house, not this, da, da, da. Not get
Their own
married. And I'm like,
insecurities.
yeah. And I'm like, no, but this makes sense. This makes sense. Like, you told me you don't lease a car. So now you buy the car. So instead of me leasing a closet, I bought the building. Now, by the way, to be fair, it's a lot different now. In 2021, when we're recording this, to be competitive in the data center space, you're going to have to spend $1 billion or more because, again, it's a physics game. So you have to be in very specific geographies. And people like us, came way before. And so there's no need to sell. Anyway, but the point is, this concept can be applied to almost any other industry today. So anyway, the summary of that whole idea is that the people that want to keep you out of things, whether they mean well, like they're your family, or they have a vested interest in no competition, like your competitors, they're going to make you feel like it's complicated. But you should imagine, so like I have this 3-step framework that I tell all my friends. It's like, look, if you want to start something, there's 2 ways to think about this, or two sort of axes to think about. So number 1, what do you like? If you like to work on consumer stuff, then what you should do is look for something that people are repeatedly doing. And I'll come back to that. And if you really like business stuff, business to business sales, business to business, whatever it is, whatever, look for like something where there's a spreadsheet in an existing industry. And the reason those 2 things are important on that first axis is because everybody wants to change the world. The reality is nobody wants to be changed. Right?
Yeah.
We all know we should probably lose 5 pounds, but man,
Yeah.
I just had the second beer. I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the second axis to look at. So once you've sort of decided maybe which side of that you might want to be on, the second axis to look at is, I think I'm saying that right. Axis. Anyway,
Yeah.
axis.
Yeah. Access.
The second one is, okay, so now you've picked a side of that. Okay, so now what you need to do is find an incumbent that's been there for 10 years. Because if they've been there 10 years and they're not venture funded, they probably are making money, right? Like you can't survive as a bootstrapped company. Bonus points if they have 100 or more employees, because if they've been around for 10 years and they have 100 employees, they're really making money. Now, here's the real trick. Imagine what that business looks like with a deep understanding of today's technology, a deep understanding of today's digitally native consumer, and no legacy baggage, no legacy stakeholders, none of that stuff. And I guarantee you, like, there's something there. And in fact, that's the framework that I've been using for years in terms of like how I invest. Like, why do I invest in the things I invest in? Why I look at like, I don't invest in innovation. I invest in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to like go to Mars. I mean, I would love to, right? But as an individual investor, I can't fund a rocket. But what I can do is like fund entrepreneurs that are, going to make something that the industry already does or a consumer already does and just make it easier, faster, smoother, and get paid for it in the process. So anyway, I feel like I kind of took that all over the place. So hopefully there's some nuggets in there for people.
No, that's good. So, you have a 9-figure exit in 2004. You described '04 to '08 being an asshole. I'm curious, like how, when you have that amount of success as a 23, 24-year old, I'm sure your ego got inflated a little bit.
I
Um,
think that's an understatement, but yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, can you speak to, managing that and staying, not like necessarily, like, I guess, humble or true to character more, or, I guess what lessons did you learn from that 04 to '08 period?
Mm, no, I can't tell you that I learned any lessons. I was too, I don't like who I was. Like, I don't like that, I don't like that time in my life. You know, I'm not proud of it. I think the reality is that like it took me sort of hitting rock bottom to realize like, so there's this cliche, right? That, money doesn't change you. It actually just sort of exposes who you really are. So true. So true. Every insecurity I had, I spent money on it. Every, um, like like personal relationship I had, I'm like, oh, like they'll come hang out with me. I don't need to go there. Like, and so not a good period of my life. I think it took me hitting sort of rock bottom to realize that like the don't get me wrong, you should like it is a little bit easier to have money. Don't get me wrong. Like obviously you don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. There is some value to it. But the reality is that you have to um, I don't know, you got to be able to look in the mirror and sort of be comfortable with who you are. And I think that that's a very like it takes nobody can tell you that from the outside. Like you couldn't have sat me down 15 20 well now 20 years ago, you couldn't have sat me down and said like, Paul, you need to cool your jets. Like my
Yeah.
parents tried to like, oh, Paul, your ego's getting too big, da, da, da. And I was like, no, you guys are dumb. Like I said a lot of terrible things to everybody. um, but to be honest, it really took like it took a lot of time, and it took me sort of like hitting the bottom myself before I was like, all right, sort of made my bed, got to lay in it now. That's not who I'm going to be. That's not who I want my kids to know, and yeah, I don't know. I'm not trying to like skirt your question, right? But it like
No,
sort of
no,
makes
no,
me
no.
uncomfortable to sort
No.
of,
If there's any lessons so that the next person doesn't make the same mistakes, or what you learned in '08 to feel like you were in a better place, or it kind of gotten
I think,
yourself out of that.
well, look, I think, okay, so on a personal note, so I will try to answer your question. I'll just say, first off, on a personal note, I really wouldn't have gotten to where I am today personally without having all these problems. So, um, that's the silver lining, right? Uh, so I say that carefully because, like, hell, if my kids listen to this in 20 years and they're like, oh my God, my dad didn't want me, like, that's not what I mean by what I'm about to say here. Like, the truth is, had I not screwed all that up, I wouldn't have the life and the kids and the family that I do now, and I love them. Um, But like if I could time travel back and like talk to my younger self, like I think I would not have been able to convince myself of anything unless I was able to bring back like a video or something of like I like there's again, I feel weird because this feels like a cliche, but like if you died today, what would the obituary say? And if you're not 100% sure of what it would say, you're probably not doing it right. I hope people think about that, by the way. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not, morbid and thinking about it tomorrow or anything like that, but, it's something I think about a lot now. So it influences the way I think about my schedule. I cut out of work. I walk away from my desk at 4 o'clock on Mondays, daddy daughter date night every Wednesday. It's been that way for years. My boys every other Friday, I cut off the desk at 4, we go get our haircuts, guys time together, and, um, it's hard. The world wants to pull you back into work, and sometimes the kids are temper tantrums at 2 years old, and it's hard. But like, what do you want them to remember you for? Like, I remember distinct moments from my childhood that my parents probably didn't mean for me to remember, but they stayed with me, and now it's like, man, I want to engineer that. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
uh, so anyway, I don't want to like
Yeah.
kind of be a
No.
pessimist here or make it sound sad or anything like that. I think the thing is though is that like I believe I take a more proactive role in my life now, in my own life, in my own future now, and I think people should really really try to do the same.
Yeah.
The benefits are compounding. Everything you do is compounding, and so whether it's good stuff you spend your time on or bad stuff, it will compound. And you just need to know that, and as long as you can look in the mirror and know that you're spending the time right, and you're good. You're good. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what anybody else thinks.
Yeah.
uh,
So 2008, you start Results Junkies. This is a very unique, business model that I personally hadn't heard of until I read your story. Um, I'm curious, what has traveling to maybe sort of secondary cities, um, that aren't your traditional, you know, California or New York, cities taught you about investing and angel investing?
a couple things I would say, ambition. So at this point, here we are in like 2021, late 2021, and I would say that today we've got about 3,000 portfolio companies spread out across just about 60 countries and almost every state in the U.S. now. What I've learned is that ambition is equally distributed. Skills are not, um, but good people are everywhere. Like I was just actually earlier today, I was talking to an angel group up in, I think Alberta or Saskatchewan or something like that. And, so I said, like, look, our model, believe it or not, is, if you think it's already crazy, what makes it even crazier is that of the 200 or so deals we do every year, 100 of them are what we call Main Street, like brick and mortar, restaurants, bars, daycares, code schools, taco trucks. And then the other 100 are what we call the tech startups. And I was talking about that with them, and one of the folks in the audience said something like, "Well, how? Like how does that work?" And I regret my sarcasm, but I said, "Hey, listen, I don't know if you know this, but people have been buying and selling restaurants for like 200 years. Tech startups are really only like 50 years old." And I think it was like sort of like an eye opener. And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, like, look, here's the deal. You know, your question is phrased as if it's an either or. You either are in tech companies or you are not. And the truth is that like that's only true if you manage other people's money. If you manage other people's money, okay, you've now agreed to a limited partner agreement. You've agreed to like a thesis, and you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like those people are limited. But as individuals, you and I, we can construct a portfolio however we want. And so for me, it's like, well, I wanted a portfolio that has sort of the upside power law possibilities of the tech companies, but with the steady and more predictable distributions of the real world. And so rather than spend all my time, for example, on like, tech platforms like AngelList, I split it up. Like half the time I'm watching AngelList and like all the tech startups, and I'm going to all the demo days and seeing what everybody else is doing on the tech side. But the other half of the time, I'm subscribed to all the brick and mortar newsletters, LoopNet, Biz Buy Sell, MicroAcquire, all these things, right? And so it's not either or. And frankly, for anybody listening to this, you can do this. It doesn't take a lot of money, by the way. Like well, look, relative to where it was, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you couldn't invest, $1 million a year minimum, nobody took you seriously. Truth of the matter is now, honestly, 10 grand, 12 grand a year tops is really like a good starting point because you could do a $1,000 deal every year. I'm sorry, every month. Now you may say, gosh, that doesn't seem like a lot, right? But the reality is, for a lot of these like companies, especially the tech ones, the power law distribution return model is obscene. Like your downside is, let's just say for simple math here, you do 10 $1,000 investments in tech startups. Obviously, your downside is you lose all $10,000. But depending on your thesis and your model and what you believe and all that stuff, hey, look, if one of those things 100x's, you've turned that 10 with 9,000 of losses into $100,000. Now, again, we're not talking about fees or anything like that yet, right? But my point is not to say that 10,000 is a little bit of money. Obviously, for a lot of people, that is still a lot of money. I respect that. But my point is simply that it is way more accessible than it used to be. And I see hope in that, and so the same goes for like, like brick and mortar, like people don't realize, like, if you go to companies like, let's just say you sit there on Biz Buy Sell, or you sit on Micro Acquire, or you sit on LoopNet, right? I mean, look, if a business is selling for $1 million as a brick and mortar, first of all, they're overselling it because you're really not going to pay more than maybe 1x the earnings, if that. Secondly, the US SBA provides great financing. You probably put up 5 or 10%. You got like cheap, debt service against the business. So again, I'm not saying any of this stuff is easy, but it is simple. And I think that people need to this goes back to what we talked about earlier. The people that want to make this complicated are the people that either want to like charge you for it or keep you out of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
I'm not a finance guy.
yeah.
I'm still not a finance guy. So, uh, anyway, I hope that like it doesn't come across wrong or anything like that. I just mean to show people that there's a lot of opportunity in front of them. Embrace it,
No,
you
I
know?
think that was the opposite. I think that was really good because it has a level of practicality for people that do have, you know, $10,000 to $12,000 to play with, or um to not make excuses, on that being a limiting factor.
Yeah, by the way, on that note, I know for sure somebody in your audience, because this always happens every time I do this, somebody in your audience will email me and they'll say, "But Paul," they'll say, "well, you can't be saying that because everybody's got to be an accredited investor." Okay. For the lawyers in the room or listening to this, yeah, you're right. Okay. But ignoring those lawyers for a minute here, if that was really the case, now I know it is actually the case, you're supposed to be an accredited investor, but like, are we really saying that every restaurant in this country that has been funded by Uncle John and Aunt Sally has been done by accrediteds? Absolutely not. The vast majority of businesses in this country are funded by family or friends. There's no way, no way they're accredited. So, you know, save yourselves the email. Don't even bother.
Yeah, yeah,
This is accessible for people in here.
yeah. I'm curious. This is a little bit out there, but do you have any advice on getting a good RV?
uh, okay, so
What?
I bought an Airstream. So I bought a 33-foot Airstream at 2016, and I sort of set it up kind of for dry camping and off-grid living, and big solar, big water, a lot of stuff like that. You don't have to go that route. Um, I didn't know anything about it. I love it. We still use it. I love it. I love the thing. And I remember my thought process at the time. I was like, yeah, I don't know anything about these air. Indian people, we don't have RVs, right? So like,
Yeah,
I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, well, if it's good enough for Apollo mission astronauts and Matt McConaughey, I guess an Airstream's good enough for me. I mean, that is literally the logic I used. Um, I don't know. Okay, I will say one other thing about RVs. People don't understand that you can make anything you want. I'll give you an example. People ask me all the time, they're like, "Oh man, how'd you get it to be like off grid?" So like, I love being in the outdoors, but I also love sleeping at 62 degrees at night. Like I will icebox the house.
yeah,
And so I was not going to sacrifice that to live in an RV. And so when I went and I, bought this thing, I started like scouring the Airstream boards, and I met these like two electrical guys, and I was like, look, this is what I want to build. And they were like, that's kind of hard to do. I'm like, no, I get that. But like, I'm an engineer. Like hard means we can solve it. And we did. For 19,000 bucks, I put in a huge battery, lithium battery system, a huge solar array, huge hybrid inverters, backup generators, all sorts of stuff, so that I had 2-zone HVAC in a 33-foot air. It is obscene how over-engineered this thing. My point is, 19 grand is a lot of money, no doubt, but it's certainly not as much as people think. Like if you want to buy my RV right now, brand new, and do what I did to it, probably can get it out the door for like 130 with all the fixings that I've got. Now, you're probably thinking, your audience is probably thinking, "Gosh, Paul, that's a lot of money. Are you kidding me?" Let's go back to that Ferrari example. RVs, because of our tax code, all that stuff, they're treated like second homes for the most part. Now, again, finance people are going to say no, whatever. But like, And this is not great financial advice, but look, if you really want that, that's like $800 a month. Now, that may not be the best financial decision, but it is accessible, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that people need to understand that. Like, you are 30 days away from whatever you want to be. You want to be more fit. You want to live in an RV. You want to get married. You want to start a business. You're 30 days from it. Frankly, you're probably 3 days from it, but let's give it 30 so you have some time. But, like the point is, it's not a year. It's not 3. It's not 10, and that's like maybe one of the other lessons I hope other people like kind of take away from all this stuff is that like, you have to move forward. Like, there's always those cliches like, do you want to like regret stuff? Yada, yada, yada. I don't like looking at things pessimistically. I like to look at things more optimistically. It's like, just you're 30 days from whatever you want, happier relationship, whatever it is. Like somebody once said, I read it somewhere, I don't know where, but somebody said like, your success is a function of the hard conversations you're willing to have. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It means all the
Yeah.
power is in your hands. I love that. Love it. I hate
Yeah.
confrontation, but I love the control. Like I love that like I can either wallow in it, or I can do something. I can either feel the pressure or apply the pressure. I like that.
Yeah.
And that to me is what entrepreneurial thinking is about, to be honest with you. It's not about starting or not starting. It's about like defaulting towards action, doing something about it. Side hustles, promotions, new businesses, whatever it is. It's just about action. So
Yeah.
I, this is I'm gonna be like the Indian Tony Robbins for this group here. I apologize. I'm gonna send you guys all tickets to a shady hotel by the airport, and we'll have a little pep rally or something.
Yeah. um, so Paul, we've, now discussed, immigrant background, CarMax, AOL, data center company, RVs, Results Junkies. And then I see in 2017, Bump Health, co-founder and chief revenue officer. Talk to us about how, you got involved there and, what the business is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, there's the short answer and the complete answer, and I'll go wherever you want. Let's start with the short answer. So, um, around that time, 2015 and beyond, I was traveling the country in an RV with my family, and trying to visit as many places as I could. And so the quick version of this is that I ended up. So what I would do is I would just sort of email my email list every week, and hey, what's up? What's going on out there? Where should I be stopping? And somebody years ago was like, hey, I live in Peoria, Illinois. You should stop by here and check out our entrepreneurial community. And that's that. And so that's what I did. So I pulled into town, hung out for a couple days. And the long and short of it is I met the two founders of Bump Boxes there. And that's kind of how it began. We kind of hit it off personally, I think. I met him that day, I was only there for about 3 days. Unfortunately, the way the travel worked at the time, I couldn't spend much time there. But I had a really good conversation with him, and really, I think, connected on a personal level. And it was a pretty natural thing. In about a week or so, we started trading emails about other ideas on how to grow this thing faster, bigger, more impactful, that sort of thing. And the long and short of it is, I think it was about 10 or 14 days later, I ended up flying back to Peoria. The trailer was at that point, I think, was over in Connecticut. And I ended up just spending a weekend, if I remember right, flying back on like a Sunday, and meeting with them again over lunch and just talking about like how much bigger I thought it could be. Now, mind you, they had not raised any money. We were not talking about raising money. They were bootstrapped. I think they were right at the beginnings of 9 figures of revenue, something like that. But the long and short of it is like, you know, I just kept sort of banging my fist on the table about how much bigger it could be. And I don't want that to sound bad. Like, it's not like they weren't thinking big enough. I mean, they had built a profitable company around subscription boxes for expecting moms. And the gist of it was like, I guess I was coming in with a perspective of like, hey, look, here's what I'm seeing across the venture community. Here's what I'm seeing in terms of the industry, that all the industries that sort of like face moms. There's something bigger here. And that's sort of how we met. So we started working together. Again, I can tell you like the polished version of all this, but there's probably not enough time here. The gist of it is, I met them on the RV trip. We started kind of jiving together personally, I think, before we met professionally, and really just kind of, I guess we just started talking about how things should be bigger, like how there were way more moms than they were thinking about. Like the market opportunity was much larger when you think about, the state of women's health. In other words, like don't get me wrong, like building a business around expecting moms is amazing, amazing, and they were a testament to that. But, I couldn't help but sort of think about it from the perspective of, wait a second, like there's something larger here. I mean, there's millions of expecting parents every year, and many of the industries that they face are antiquated. And so, look, I'll tell you as much as you want to know. I don't want to ramble, but I
Yeah, yeah.
guess,
No, I mean,
yeah.
so I mean, obviously, I have some background information, but kind of tell the audience what distinguishes you guys from what's already out there.
Well, I like to let's start with the elevator pitch here. So Bump Health is what I like to call the Procter and Gamble of the 21st century. So um, we're trying to build or buy as many business units as necessary to help smooth out the um, broad range of experiences that mom has to deal with in that sort of 20-year-ish period of her life between the day she decides to conceive and the day that child reaches an adulthood. And let me explain what that means, by the way, just on a personal note. Uh, I've got 3 kids now, and a lot of the things I'm about to tell you, I didn't experience or understand on the first time around. A first time parent, you're just trying to take it all in. You don't know what's wrong, what's right. You just sort of, it's like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
blur to
yeah,
me.
yeah.
But around that same time, 2017, 2018 is when we got pregnant with our second. And that's when it became a little bit more apparent to me, like some of the friction points. And so, as an example, just one of many examples, we found out we were pregnant. We scheduled the appointment with the OB for the first visit. Um, that appointment's 3 weeks later. Doctor's 40 minutes late to the appointment because they're overbooked. They're in there for 7 minutes, and I was just thinking to myself on the way home that day, like obviously we got to see the baby. It was so amazing with the sonogram, but I couldn't help it. My professional brain just started ticking, and I'm like, wait a second. If I was 40 minutes late to a meeting with you or anybody else, etiquette 101 would say it is totally okay for you to be kind of frustrated with me, and that would be disrespectful. I mean, well, that's not a great way to start a relationship, but that's the norm
Mm.
in women's health for as an OB. One other related example, and then I'll kind of get to the point here. Uh, here at the time, here we are at like 2017, 2018 almost. We're pregnant with our second, and I think at the time somebody told me, hey, you should be really careful about the deodorant that you guys use because they have metal, flakes, and there's peer-reviewed research. You should really kind of switch to these other trusted brands at least for the 8 or 9 months so that developmentally, And I'm like, that seems to make sense. And yeah, you're right. There is peer-reviewed research. And when I would walk into the local CVS or Walmart or Target, I would be like, hey, where's the pregnancy safe section? And people looked at me like I was crazy. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. How is that possible? Like millions of people get pregnant every year, and yet there's no, like you would think that would be normal. They'd say, hey, here's a mark that says these are pregnancy safe. That didn't exist. Anyway, the long and short of it is that as in that second pregnancy, all these things sort of were like happening at the same time. I was driving around and I met, my co-founders, on the Bump Boxes side. But then at the same time, I'm experiencing this, and I didn't know at the time how they were all kind of fitting together. But I guess the long and short of it is that, as I was experiencing it the second time around, I just was much more aware of how difficult it was for us as a, second time parent to like know what was safe.
Mm.
And I just thought, I guess professional Paul was thinking, gosh, that's a huge opportunity.
Mm.
And again, I'm just, for the sake of time, I'll just kind of fast forward. And I just came to this conclusion on a professional note that I kept wondering why is it this way? Like, why is it this way? How is this possible? Like the capitalist in me was thinking, if the market wanted something better, it would have been made already. But here's the gist. I spent a lot of time, around that time when I met, my friends at Bump Boxes, trying to connect the dots. And I came to this conclusion that, in many other, we talked about my experience with Results Junkies. We've got about 3,000 portfolio companies. And I think a lot about industry change. And I kept thinking, like, why is that not holding true here? And I came to this conclusion that it was for three reasons. That the women's health space had not sort of gotten better for moms at the same rate as many other industries, I think for three reasons. Number one, there had been no large scale exodus of entrepreneurial, experienced people from high growth companies into the women's health industry. Now, just to be clear, that's not to say it hasn't happened, but in broad strokes, you didn't see like armies of ex Google, ex high growth
Yeah.
company, people going over there. The second reason is that there wasn't a lot of money available to start in the women's health space. You know, there's a lot of systemic reasons there, but 2% of venture money went to women or female founders. You know, that's a big argument. But there wasn't a lot of money to start. That was the second reason. And the third, I think, most important reason why women's health as a broad set of industries hadn't gotten better is because, unlike many other industries that we've all probably experienced in the startup world, this particular industry is dominated by incumbents that are 50, 100, and 180 plus years old. Not to pick on them, but just as an example, Procter and Gamble's 187 years old.
Yep.
How do you fight that? So I came to this conclusion that I thought that women's health was one of the rare industries that, was not going to be disrupted or for the better by venture-backed companies because the time scales are mismatched. What I mean by that is that if you raise money from me or any institutional firm, unfortunately or fortunately, there's a quarterly reporting expectation, and you're typically only raising money for 12 to 18 months at a time. Now, that doesn't sound bad, I suppose, except in this particular industry, you're dealing with incumbents that have, larger time horizons. They don't have to outcompete. They just have to have higher staying power.
Mm.
And
Yep.
that's a really interesting but rare thing. I'll just give you one example, and then I'll let me let you drive here. But one example, cliche, but let me just use it anyway.
Yeah.
Facebook, when it was coming up through the ranks, I'm going to kind of like paraphrase history here. But when Facebook started, the incumbents it was fighting were only a few years older than it. MySpace, Friendster,
Friendster. Yep.
you know, those were obviously formidable in their own way, but they were only what 5 years ahead,
Yep.
maybe 10 years ahead, somewhere in there, right?
Yep.
So disrupting those incumbents was a little bit easier, not easy, but easier. Now contrast that to this industry where you got competitors that are a century old.
A lot different.
It's very different, very
Yeah.
different. So anyway, that being said, though, back to Bump Health, I like to say we're the most ambitious company that nobody talks about. We spent our first, 3.5 years or so just really focused on externally what people know as Bump boxes and Bitsy boxes. But internally, that's only one of our 4 business units at the moment. Here we are at the beginning of 2022. So yeah, I mean, we're just trying to build a large business without other investors. We're trying to create a lot of wealth for our team. We're trying to create better lives and outcomes for millions of moms around the country. We're primarily focused in the U.S. at the moment, but we have an increasing footprint outside, but primarily in the U.S. So
Yeah.
uh,
So, you said a collection of businesses. I'm curious, that's, you know, M&A is always difficult, integration's always difficult. How have you, you know, kind of kept things streamlined and smooth in that?
primarily for the first 4 years, it's been about building it all.
Mm.
Any of the acquisitions we did were primarily distressed deals where we would find something interesting that unfortunately didn't work out on its own, and we would just, acquire the assets in. So for the first 4 years, we built pretty much everything internally. And any of the acquisitions you'll find are, relatively small, and I want to be respectful to the companies that we did that with, but they were distressed. Now I think that we're at an interesting point. Here we are in 2022 now. I think this is a really pivotal year for us because we need to start turning towards our peers and some larger companies in the space, and look at how we would structure those sorts of acquisition relationships. What I mean to say is that we started like any other company, in the sense that we're product centric, product focused, um, and now I think this year for us is a sort of a pivotal year because it's our moment to start consciously shifting to being a distribution centric company. So what I mean to say is that in many, if you were to like look over my shoulder at my browser tabs, the thing I spend a lot of time reading up on is the history of larger companies like Microsoft and Oracle and Cisco, Amazon. And what I mean by that is that if you look back at their history, you can clearly, in hindsight anyway, see where they made the transition from product centric to distribution centric. Now, just to paraphrase, let me just give you an example there. Let's just use Microsoft.
Yeah.
For the first decade or so of that company, they were selling operating systems, DOS. Now, by the way, for the history buffs in here, I am intentionally paraphrasing. Hang on to your hate mail here. I'm not trying to be exact. We don't have enough time for that. But
Yeah.
high level, for the first decade or so, Microsoft was a company that made an operating system and distributed that operating system onto as many systems as possible. But somewhere in the early 80s, what you can see is their strategy shifted. It's almost as if from the outside, they realized like, hey, wait a second. Our operating system is already sitting on millions of computers already. Hang on a minute. What else are those users using our operating system to do? We own the distribution channel. What else should we build or buy? Like if they're going to work with clunky spreadsheets on top of DOS, let's make that less worse. Let's build or buy those tools. And so it's almost like in the early 80s, everything changed. Not only did DOS start to get better, but it's almost like they were just building or buying anything that you did repetitively on top of DOS to make it better.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a big year for us because we started out as a product-based company, thinking about bump boxes. It was a subscription box for everything mom and baby needed from the day she conceived through the baby's birth. And then our thinking naturally expanded into, well, hang on a minute, those things, health and safety and that sort of stuff, that doesn't end at the baby's birth. So we
Yeah.
extended our business into Bitsy boxes, and and our subscription extends all the way out to the baby's third birthday if mom so chooses. And so again, I'm telling you this all with the clarity of hindsight, but just to zoom out and tell you what we are today, we have 4 business units today. The first is Bump Consumer. Now these are all internal names. You won't you can Google these, you just may not find them. But Bump Consumer essentially is our holding area for everything that we sell on the consumer side. So Bump boxes, Bitsy boxes. We have a white labeled, a internally designed brand called Glow Organics. You can find that on Amazon and even in our own boxes. Our second business unit is Bump Wellness. That is essentially everything we do on the consumer side, but white labeled for corporations. So, what that means is that, let's say you work at some company. We've got hundreds of publicly traded customers now, but if you work at certain companies and you notify HR that you or your partner are expecting, more often than not, you're going to get a white labeled, subscription. It looks and feels and smells like the company. It's got their logo and their products in it and stuff like that. But if you look closely from where it was shipped and all that, you'll see our fingerprints all over it because it comes out of our facilities, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's Bump Wellness. The third business unit is more recent. We opened up Bump Medical well, I guess about 9 or 10 months ago now. The value prop there is that we are extracting everything that mom is owed through her healthcare payer. So, for any of the listeners that have children, many of them know that, for example, you're entitled to a free breast pump under the Affordable Care Act. But actually, there's far more included in that. Depending on which payer you're in, you've got access to postpartum undergarments, all these things. The gist of it is that there are many underlying reasons why the incumbents won't help you get that out of your payer, but we kind of approach that as a tech company, and so that's going really well for us. And the fourth and the latest business unit is called Bump Life. It is truthfully very nascent right now. We're just now in the beginnings of setting it up, but it is essentially what I call the Expedia for life, home, and auto insurance. Again, very early at this point. We're still we just set it all up. Well, I'm starting to recruit for it, that sort of thing. So that's where we are today. I'll just say one other thing about this, by the way. Look, compounding is a very interesting thing. It's very hard, and what I'm about to say applies to personal careers, personal lives, but also professional careers. Like, the way I just explained that story to you, or what we are to you, makes it sound like it's very easy. But the truth of it is, Bump Consumer was essentially 100% of our focus for the first maybe 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Bump Wellness then, came online, I guess, just under 2 years ago now. The third business unit came online about 9 or 10 months ago, and Bump Life came on now. So, when you think about, if you were to draw out your own career, the progression of your career personally and professionally, when you zoom out, it doesn't look like a straight line up and to the right. It actually looks like a series of step functions. And what ends up happening is that, like, the distance between those step functions gets smaller and smaller because your growth rate personally and professionally speeds up.
Yeah.
So I feel like I just kind of rambled at you there for a little
Yeah.
bit.
No worries. So, I mean, you talked about how the first 2.5 years were mostly, the consumer subscriptions. That's a tough business, the subscription box business. Any learning lessons there on keeping it
I mean,
profitable and things like that?
yeah, I mean, well, yeah, and I'm for anybody on my own team that's listening to this, I'm not going to do any justice because there's a lot to it. But I think that in this moment, what I would say is that you got to don't outsource anything, and you got to understand your margins. I mean, I see, you're right that subscription boxes are a very, very tough business, very tough business. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. And they're tough for a lot of reasons, including margins, but also customer acquisition. Anyway, yeah, it's tough. And actually, it's even more tough right now, given a lot of the changes. So anybody listening to this that's working in the, let's call it direct to consumer space, DTC space, you know what I'm talking about, because April 2020 is when everything changed for all of us. April, iOS 14.5 went out. All of the targeting changed. I don't want to go super nerdy here, but cost of acquisition has tripled almost, maybe even quadrupled for every DTC e-commerce company, whether you're a subscription box company or anything else. So it has never been harder to acquire customers now. But it's also been never easier to lose a ton of money, especially when you're dealing with physical products. But look, the reason that this is still lucrative is because I'm putting on my Results Junkies hat from the last episode. Look, here's the thing. I have this very loose, principle or theory on this, and that is that the first wave of technology was really hardware. If you think about 1950 to roughly 2000, a lot of the biggest, most successful companies were hardware. Silicon chips, computers, mainframes, servers, desktop computers. Then somewhere around the 2000 mark, I would say we went into the second phase of technology companies, and from the second wave of technology companies, it was really about software built on top of all of that. So let's call that 2000 to 2015 was, we saw the rise of the Facebooks and the PayPals and the, like lots of like eBay. I mean, maybe a lot of people listening to this don't think about eBay, but in its time, it was amazing. It allowed people to sell stuff to other people, like physical products, without having to have a store. That's profound. And I would say here we are now in 2020 and beyond. I think we're in the third phase of the internet or technology. And I believe the biggest money to be made over this decade is going to be at what I call the intersection of online and offline. So while it's also never been harder to start a company in the physical space using technology, and it's also now easier to like run out of money in this space, this is where I think the biggest financial returns and societal impact are going to happen over the next 10 years. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not sure where your audience is. Hopefully we're not losing them already
No,
here, but
no.
we're all over.
So, Paul, you're in the midst of it, right? You're in the journey right now. Um, you know, how are you setting goals, you know, especially now that you're adding different product lines that are totally different from a, consumer subscription box business, when you're talking about, life insurance or whatever. How are you, dividing your time, and how are you setting goals for each of these sectors?
It's interesting. Okay. All right. So what I'll just say is, that's a very interesting question that you've asked, and we didn't talk about it, in the pre-show thing here. Let me start by saying that I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's top of mind for me right now because, what's interesting as our company is growing is that, each business unit requires a slightly different kind of person to join it.
Yep.
In other words, the type of people that, for example, can grow a consumer business are very different than the type of people that, can do longer term, business to business sales on the bump wellness side. And you
Mm.
see where I'm going with that, by the way,
Yep.
because now now when we go into bump medical, that's a very different kind of person that has the healthcare experience and that sort of thing. So this is like top of mind for me right now. So I told you all that, gave you all those caveats so that, anybody accusing me of like not knowing my stuff knows that I don't know my stuff here.
Good.
But I'll tell you where my head's at. I think that, our mandate internally, the thing I keep saying to everybody is we need to continue 2xing our revenue every year. Not because money's everything, but because I think that revenue is a pretty good proxy for how much value you add to the customer or to the industry. Now, how do we get there? I think this year is going to be a big internal focus on culture. I think also it's going to be a big external focus on brand. Now, I admit what I'm telling you doesn't have a whole lot of clarity around it because even just this morning I was in a long call with a couple of folks on my team talking about this. But our biggest challenge as we continue the growth, but also start this conscious shift into becoming a distribution centric company, the common denominator is people. And by the way, had you and I had this conversation like 3 years ago, I would have, I would have looked the other way. I would have said, no, 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 no. Like we just brute force our way, da da da. But
Mm.
here we are now in 2022, beginning of 2022, and I can tell you my thinking has changed in a big way. So I guess to answer your question specifically, we're going to have to double down hard on thinking about our own internal culture. We're going to have to start thinking a lot about, taking ownership of, even simple ideas like how many of our own staff can actually articulate the vision of bump health. I feel, compelled to admit that here we are at the beginning of 2022, not many of them can. And that's my fault. That's our fault as a leadership team. But we're going to fix that this year. We're going to focus on better onboarding. We're going to focus on helping elevate the personal brands of our team all throughout the company. And we need to start acting as a group of 100 smart people. Without letting the cat out of the bag, I guess, what I'll just say, because I'm guessing this will go out in a couple weeks. Here's what I'll just say about where my head's at, and where I'm heading personally in this kind of equation. I think that you know I think that, like, as we think about solving for people, solving for recruiting, solving for brand, I think the reality is that I have to kind of like recognize that my own job is changing. In the early days, a lot of my I'm responsible for all of our revenue teams at Bump Health. So every one of those business units ultimately rolls up on the revenue side. Now that may or may not change by the time this thing publishes, because the way I think about it is that in the early days, my job was really to execute, then bring on people that could help me execute, and then more recently bring on leaders for each of the business units that could help us grow the people that execute.
Yep.
But now where I believe I'm at, and this is what I was talking about with my team this morning, I said, hey, for this new thing I'm thinking about, I think I'm starting to recognize that my job is shifting to this more um, uh, hard to articulate role where it's my job now to convince smart people to think differently.
Mm.
And I ask me again over the next, couple days or weeks on what that means, and I'll have a
Yeah.
better answer for you. But something's changing. I think that I need to continue kind of like, thinking about the team. And anyway,
Yeah.
your question is particularly well timed, and you probably didn't even know that, but really interesting. And I hope we can talk about it in like 30 days, maybe,
Yeah.
because I'll
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
lot more thought around it. But yeah, so
Yeah.
we got some big stuff coming for this year,
Yeah.
and it's well, I'll say one other thing about this, by the way.
Yeah.
I had a 2.5 hour call with a couple of folks on my team about this topic today. And I said to them directly on this Zoom call, I said, hey, look, I'm just going to admit to all of you guys and gals that um, what we're talking about here, I'm the most optimistic about the importance of what we're talking about here, this focus on people and culture and brand and visibility, this. But I said, it's also the thing that scares me the most because it's so intangible. Everything that I spent my time on for the next 4 years in some way or another was directly attributable to our revenue growth. And now I'm realizing I'm hitting the wall. I got the same 24 hours in the day as everybody else. And how do I transition into supporting the people now that run those business units, and turnkey, how do I help them support the people that execute? Anyway, uh, it is exciting and terrifying on a personal note, but
Yeah.
I hope we talk about it again in about 30 days or so. I'll have a lot
Yeah.
more thoughts on it for you.
Yeah. This might be a bad question given what you just said, but I'm just curious, especially I think it'd be interesting, um, if I do talk to you in like 3 years to just reflect on this time period and what your thought process was. How are you looking? Obviously, there's the short term vision of a year from now, but how are you looking at the long term vision for this company? Is this something, you hope for in 3 years to have, 600 people globally? Or is this something 3 years from now you might, sell to, a bigger player in this industry? How are, at least for right now, obviously the listeners all can see you're in the midst of, you know, being an entrepreneur, but how are you thinking about it that way?
Okay, so there's a couple questions buried in there, so keep me honest here. Let me start by saying that our North Star internally is families served. It's moms served. So I posted about this, I think, a couple weeks ago on my own social profiles. So I don't think this is like secret info, but we're now coming up on about 1 million moms served,
Wow.
over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And um, the way I think about it is that we have to continue moving that needle. That number actually is what we look at as a company together. Like whether you're on the Bump Medical side or the Bump Consumer side, the common denominator, the common thread across all the business units is, how many moms and their respective families did we serve? Um, so the reason I tell you that is because, as a bootstrapped company, we don't serve any outside investors. We have no return requirements for somebody sitting in an office somewhere. However, we are very open about the fact that every person that joins our team full time does get stock options. They own a piece of the Bump Health mothership. With that comes the understanding that those stock options are worth nothing unless there's a liquidity event.
Mm.
Unless we go public or get acquired or something like that. That stuff is not, nothing but paper money. So, okay, now that I've set all that up, uh, what I tell my own portfolio companies and what I tell my company here at Bump Health is that there is a difference between getting bought versus getting sold. And the interesting thing about that is that the work required to get bought um, is the same whether or not you intend to go public or get bought by somebody or even just shed distributions back to your team. So here's what I mean by that. The analogy I kind of use when I'm explaining this to my team is, let's just say my pickup truck. If I and this is obviously an abridged version here, but if I took my pickup truck and I threw it on the corner there and put a for sale sign on it, negotiation theory 101 would say that you're going to drive by it. And since I have a for sale sign in the window, you are going to offer me the lowest possible price. And then I've got to negotiate it up. Now, conversely, and this is kind of a hyperbole, but let's try it anyway. Conversely, let's just say I keep that thing clean, and for whatever reason you go by it and you're like, man, I just love that truck. That truck's not for sale. Negotiation theory 101 would also say that if you really want that thing and that I'm not, I wasn't actually planning to sell it, you've actually got to start on the high end of what's possible
Mm.
in order to take it off my hands.
That's a good point.
So this is this is what I mean by the difference between getting bought and being sold. So now let's tie it back to your question. I don't know, I don't have a date for you on when we'll sell. But I know that we have a responsibility to the people that have joined us and accepted those stock options. We have a responsibility to creating shareholder value. And I guess if I'm just being very blunt with you, in the last 12 months, there have been lots of e-commerce companies, for better or for worse, with similar revenue to ours, and tens of millions of dollars of venture capital raised that have gone public at billion-dollar market caps. I realize this is a loaded statement, but hey, we can follow that path. I mean, our fundamentals are as good, if not better, considering we have no debt, we have no investors, and the same amount of revenue. So I know, for better or for worse, I could go, chase those billion-dollar market caps. But I don't know. I look at some of the incumbents. Back to when we first started talking about Bump Health, many of the incumbents that we are up against are 50 or 100 years old, and they've got 100+ billion-dollar market caps. One of them has almost a $400 billion market cap. Here we are in January of 2022. So why not us? If all these other industries that have become tech enabled over the last decade have shown us anything, it is that it is possible to grow to those extraordinary valuations faster than ever. I mean, I have a stat somewhere that I should probably dig up for you, but you guys can Google this. It took publicly traded companies of, pre-technology, it took publicly traded companies decades to hit billion-dollar market caps. That's not the case anymore. So anyway, yeah. I mean, look, I guess that was a long way of saying we're just going to keep growing aggressively and focus on our North Star, focus on continuing to remain profitable, and in doing that, we are doing the work to be interesting enough for someone to buy. But since we're not for sale, we're, at some point it'll make sense for us to maybe go public or look at those other liquidity events. But we do not look at how many employees or team members we want. Like, I don't think about like, oh, I need 600 or 700 or 800 people. In fact, actually, now that I'm riffing on this,
Yeah.
the thing I think a lot about as we expand into other business units is I like to tell our team that we're in the business of entrepreneurship, not innovation. And what I mean by that is that we're not trying to, innovation to me is like the work required to take people to Mars.
Mhm.
That's fascinating, innovative work. You've got to build things that don't exist. And that's important work. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. But, if you go back to the story I told you early on about, my own experience with our second kid and beyond, uh, what we're talking about here is looking at incumbents that have been in this industry doing these things with or to moms for decades. And I kind of think about it with a 3 bullet point sort of mental model. I say to myself, okay, that company that maybe caused a lot of friction to that mom in that industry or whatever. Number one, what would it look like if it started today with a deep understanding of today's technology? Number two, what would it look like if it started today with a deep understanding of today's digitally native mothers and families? And three, what would that business look like if it started today without any of the legacy stakeholder baggage? There's a reason why incumbents can't move quickly. It's because there's a lot of baggage, whether it's debt, infrastructure, hundreds or if not thousands of people that have to be convinced to do something new. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, I
Yeah.
think there's hopefully a lesson in there for people listening to this. By the way,
Oh,
is that
100%. I
this?
loved your first. That was really good for me. The first point being it's about the mothers served, because I wasn't even thinking about that, which is on me. But that's great that the co-founder is thinking that way. Um,
Like just so you guys can, just so that your audience can kind of apply this to themselves. I like to tell people that you'll know that you're thinking about this wrong if, let's say, you're thinking about something. It could be something for your career, something for your business, whatever it might be. If the words change the way are anywhere in what you're thinking about, I would caution you that like change the way is when you get into innovation territory. And if you're going to do that, do it consciously. I don't think people do that consciously. The way I think about it is that uh, I'd rather think about what people are doing already, and how do we make it less frictiony.
yeah,
You know,
and
um, so in other words, if you're in the B2C space, for example, and you're not sure what to do next, look for repetitive behaviors. Don't pay attention to what people tell you to do or say they want. Look at what they do. And on the B2B side, look for repetitive behaviors. If you're saving a business time or making the money, how can they not pay you?
yeah,
And stay on the entrepreneurship side. The verb, by the way, entrepreneurship these days is like considered a noun. It's just not true. Just stay on the entrepreneurship side and think about how to reduce friction uh, and profit. To be
yeah,
honest.
yeah. Paul, I am curious. Time, right? You're in your results junkies is has 3,000 portfolio companies. You're in the midst of, building this business in bump health that's growing, 2x annually. You've got, wife, kids. You've got, maybe a little time for self-care and hobbies or whatever you enjoy, TV shows or sports or whatever. I mean, how do you manage all this?
I will admit, not very well. But I think that I think it's also about being. Look, I have the same hours in the day as anybody else. The question is, what do you fill the in between moments with? Um, you know, I will be the first to tell you I don't. I'm probably not up to date on the latest entertainment trends or whatever, but I try to be conscious about when I spend time with my family and what I'm working on at any given time. In fact, my life is kind of I like sticky notes. It's not very innovative, but I
Mm.
think about compartmentalizing my day into what needs to get done at any given time, and you set a timer and you just do it.
Yeah.
Um, but look, here's the thing: the work will drown you if you let it. And things will waste your time if you let it. And so, the I guess what I would just say is like I'm not some superhuman, and I'm not I'm not magically able to do more than other people. I mean, look, Results Junkies is just my wife and I, and Bump Health today is probably almost 100 people now. But back
Wow.
in the day, it wasn't. It was a couple of us sitting around a table trying to figure it out. Um, but the thing about it is just ruthless prioritization. I'm hesitating from what I want to say because I think without context it's going to sound bad, but let me just say it anyway. Just stop being romantic about your time and your money.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like, you know, um, people tend to be very romantic about their time in the sense that they say things like, "Oh, you know, um, just hustle harder." Well, come on now, that doesn't work. Hustle, hustle culture is okay, I suppose, in short stints. Maybe you got to hustle hard for 3 days because you got to hit some deadline or something.
Yeah.
But over an extended period of time, that is the recipe for burnout.
Mm.
And so you got to be honest about, why are we hustling here? Is it necessary, or is it sort of, driven by, anxiety? I don't know. Like, just be conscious about it. Don't be romantic about it. And on the same time, on the same token, like, don't be romantic about how you make your money. Like, there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, if I could do X and da 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 da, wouldn't it be great if then I could make this much money? It doesn't work that way. And if you're too romantic about how you make money, uh, you end up wondering why you didn't get the raise or you didn't get more customers. I'll give you a very direct example here, by the way, that might be useful to your audience. Let's say your goal in 2022 is to make more money. The uh, romantic way to approach that is, man, if I could just do more work, I will impress my boss, or I will somehow impress, more clients, and I will make more money. That is not going to work. It might work a little bit. You can probably work a little harder for a small, sustained period of time, but then eventually you'll wonder why you stalled back out again. What you have to do is really think about um, how to increase your own value. So, for example, let's just say you're in a career somewhere and you've got to, in order to get a raise, you've got to like make the boss happier. Well, the way to approach this is what is it that your boss loses sleep over? Because if you can solve that, you become way more valuable, and you can ask for more, or you can move laterally. Now, I
Yeah.
know somebody listening to this is rolling their eyes and they're saying, "But Paul, my boss isn't ready for this," or da da da. Like, you might be right, but the reality is add more value. Think about how to add more value. Don't be romantic about it. I know I'm not articulating this particularly well, but I really do believe these ideas can be applied in personal situations and professional situations. And back to your question, look, I will be the first to tell you I don't have it fully figured out, but as I've gotten older over the years, I've learned there are things that have higher impact than others, and everything else. Like, I'm just conscious about where I spend my time.
Yeah.
And there's not much else I can tell you there. There's no secret. You're not going to somehow magically make more hours in the day. It's just give up.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but one other thing on that, by the way, look, comparing yourself to others is also a recipe for frustration. So, for
Mm.
example, when you set up this question, uh, you know, you point out, the size of my personal portfolio, and you sort of implicitly point out like where we are as Bump Health. But as with most things, it's important to remember that they didn't happen overnight. They are the function of lots of little mistakes, and a few big wins and that sort of thing. But that gets me to one other idea I just want to share with anybody that's stuck around with us this long, and that is that you know the way I think about um, decisions when it comes to my personal life or my professional career, I think in a very simplistic way. So I tell you that because most things are complex. Everything you are going to deal with in your life is complex. So, for example, How should I get a raise? How should I do this? How should I? Those are very complex things. So I just tend to boil those things down to a very simple mental model for me. And I think about it best case and worst case. So for me, the way I think about things, whether it's, hey, should I spend this extra hour doing this or should I, spend that extra hour doing that? It comes down to this. Like, what's my downside and what's my upside? Um, so as an example, like let's say I want to learn a new skill. Let's just use that as an example. Um, what's my worst case scenario if I want to learn how to code, for example? Well, my downside scenario there is capped at 1x the time, meaning let's say I commit 1 hour a day to learn how to code, just as an example.
Yeah.
What's my downside scenario? Well, at the end of like an online coding course, let's just say it's 40 hours or something. Okay, so an hour a day for 5 days a week, 8 weeks later, my downside is I lost an hour a day for 40 weeks. I've capped it at that. But my upside is a new way of thinking, possibly new skills that I can apply to my current job or beyond. If you kind of zoom out and think about that on a risk adjusted basis, you should spend the hour investing in yourself. Does that kind of make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like define the worst case and what it will cost you in terms of time and money, and then define the best case scenario and what the upside could be. And I would argue that as long as you do that analysis and the upside is greater than the possible loss, you should do it.
Yeah. Paul.
Hopefully that makes sense to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. Paul, we've talked about quite a lot. As I look to end, a lot of people are going to look at your life, and listen to this because of, the success that you found, exiting, a business million figures, being an angel investor, now being another, becoming an entrepreneur, all that. As you look at life in general, is there anything else that you would like to leave someone, with about, your take on life or anything else that's on your mind?
I would just kind of reiterate that like the worst thing anybody listening to this can do is compare themselves because, what you'll lose when you do that is the perspective that this is the function of, the compounding of sort of daily and weekly habits, you know, and it's important to, there's a yeah. Anyway, I don't want to like ramble. I guess what I would just say is I don't want people to like compare themselves at all. Don't compare to me. Don't compare to anybody else. In fact, I think the best thing you can do when you listen to this podcast and others is just cherry pick. Cherry pick the ideas that could be applied to your life or to your career and apply them. Where most people fail, in my opinion, is they're full of ideas, they're full of good intentions, but they lack in execution. Um, and I think I know it sounds really simple, but I don't know what else to tell you. There's no magic bullet here. If I had compared myself to other people 20 years ago, I would have been in debt, with a house I couldn't afford, to drive a car I couldn't afford, to do all these other things. And I'll tell you,
Yeah.
even now, my lifestyle hasn't changed much at all. In fact, maybe I spend a little bit more on convenience now, but it's not an exorbitant amount, um, I was really lucky to meet this guy, Ramit Sethi from I Will Teach You to Be Rich, like 15 years ago.
Mm.
And I worked at a company with him. He had co-founded a company called PB Wiki like 15 years ago. And I spent a year or two there, I think, with him. And at the time, I don't think he knew at the time, but at the time he was writing a book. He was writing a blog that turned out to be this book that he has. The point of it is, he talked about this idea that he called Your Rich Life. If you buy his book, I have no business relationship with him. I was lucky to know him, and yeah, what I would just say is like he had this idea in that book called Your Rich Life, and basically I'm not doing him any justice, but the gist of that is that your rich life is what you want it to be. Like if you scroll over to his Instagram or Twitter, you'll see what he means. But like for his life, he says, okay, for a 4-hour flight or longer, I'm always taking business class. Or when I go to a restaurant, I'm buying all the appetizers. And that was, I thought, a very fascinating thing because I think my own mental model prior to that was like, oh, rich people just like blow money on everything. And I guess some people do. I don't know very many. But I think what I've learned is that, like, A, it's not like that. And B, if you actually can define your own rich life, whatever that might be, I think what you'll find is the cost to support that life is far lower than you think it is. Like, let me just put it to you a different way. You said something to me. You said something earlier where you said, oh, well, what should a listener say if they hear your story of exits, da da da? The answer is nothing, because the life they really want probably doesn't cost more than another $3, $5, or maybe even $10,000 a month. Now, that's not chump change, but that's far more attainable than most people realize. Does that,
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, that was a great answer. Yeah.
So,
Don't
um,
compare.
yeah, don't compare. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the last thing, by the way, I
Yeah.
remember, when I used to sell cars, I remember, like, 20, 25 years ago now, I'd see like people driving Ferraris, and one day I, like, classic young kid thing. You see somebody at the gas station, and you're like, "Oh man, what's that car?" And I don't remember now. It's been 2 decades, but um, I was like, "Oh man, how much that car cost?" Like, you don't. Like, I would. It's weird to ask that now, but whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember this guy that I don't even know was like, "Well, how much do you think the car costs?" And I knew all the facts. I was like, "Oh man, like, I think in, like, Car and Driver it said that costs like $250,000 or something. That's so much money, man." And I remember this guy looked at me and he's like, "Uh, yeah, I guess it's like 4 grand a month." Now, look, I'm not giving you financial advice and telling you whether or not to finance the car, but my biggest takeaway at that point was like, "Holy cow, that's way more attainable than I thought." Again, to be clear to anybody listening to this, I'm not telling you whether or not to finance a car. What I'm saying is like, that little conversation opened my eyes to the reality that a lot of the stuff you see out there as success, like, if you watch enough TV shows or whatever, you would think these people are sitting on these massive trust funds, and maybe some of them are. But in my experience, the vast majority of what you think are successful people, their sort of number to hit that, whatever their rich life is actually far more attainable than you realize. And I hope people listening to this think about that,
Yeah.
because it
Oh,
becomes more attainable, right? Like,
yeah.
you know,
100%.
so anyway, hopefully, hopefully in that wide variety of topics, something's going to be useful to people, and you know, uh, anyway,
Oh,
happy to help any
100%.
way I can.
Oh, 100%. There were multiple things that were useful. Um, Paul, I just want to thank you for coming on. If there's a way for a listener to support you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say my email's a mess, but if you ever want to reach out, my social media handles are, I'm Paul Singh on Twitter. If email's your thing, then Paul at Results Junkies is my personal email. Bonus points if you put the podcast name in the subject line. That way I kind of know you came from here.
Yeah.
Um, but look, I, there's not much you can ask me that I haven't told you already. Now, I'll try my best to answer any questions you have, but don't make the mistake of like assuming I have the answers. In fact, I hope you listen to me and take my advice that, you know, I don't know anything any more than any of the other guests on this podcast do. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, you can ask questions all day if you want, but I would ask yourself, if you're asking the question just to kind of feel like you're doing something, and I would argue that most people asking questions would realize, if they're just being honest with themselves, that they're asking questions just to like feel like they're moving towards whatever their rich life is, when in fact they probably are better off just doing something right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
yeah, but seriously, my DMs are open: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. But if you like email, happy to do that as well. Um, but
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope we do talk about this. If you ever want, I suppose
Yeah.
let's do it again in like 30 or 60
No,
days, and let's talk about
100%.
people and culture and all that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we'll do it. Paul,
Actually, here's my little teaser. By
yeah.
the way, I'm gonna give you a little
Yeah.
teaser for what that next one's gonna be, because this is
All
where
right.
my head's at today.
Yeah.
I'm starting to like. I don't feel old, but I'm at the time of this recording. I'm 40 now. 2 months from being 41. I guess as I get older, I'm finding myself to be more introspective. But here's a little teaser for our next conversation.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about the arc of our careers, all of our careers, and I would argue that um, if I had to boil it down, it would come down to three phases, three distinct phases. I think the first phase of your career is getting good at a skill. And it can't just be any skill. It has
Mhm.
to be a skill that you like doing, that you are good at doing, and that a lot of other people want to pay for. So your first part of your career is really doing that. If you can do that, then the next stage of your career is going to be getting good at managing other people that are learning that skill or similar skills. And if you can get good at that, then you get to this third phase of your career, which is uh, learning to influence others. Like, not influence is different than control, because control is one of those things where it's like explicit. If you don't do what I say, I will fire you. That's the second phase of your career, right? If you're
Yeah.
managing people and you have explicit control over them, uh, that is what a lot of people's careers, I think, stop at. But the third part of people's career that people don't talk enough about is this transition from managing to leading. And that's about influence. It's about having implicit control. It doesn't matter whether I can hire and fire you. The question is, can I inspire smart people to think differently about other things? And in the process, convince them to work on across our business units and across our industry. So anyway, maybe we can talk about that. Give me about
Yeah.
30 days to kind of sort it all out, but
Yeah.
it's a topic I think a lot about.
Yeah. Well, Paul, just want to thank you tremendously. Obviously, I know you said not to compare, but in terms of inspiration, for a lot of listeners, I think they'll find that through your life of, figuring things out and finding your successful life, as you would say, and just providing us with context on, your early business journey. Um, you know your investing journey, and now your bump health journey. So thank you very much for being on.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.